Good evening, everyone, and it's almost good Yantif will be Shevat, but we're leading up for a couple of days before.
What do you call the pre-game thing?
It's timely, right?
It's very timely, yeah.
Tailgate party.
Yeah, tailgate party.
Tailgate party, all right.
Okay, yeah.
Shevat tailgate.
Shevat tailgate. So, first of all, I want to tell you that it's a great honor for me to be here and to be meeting with you and talking to you. They say, Agasta fa mile zeta mile. A guest who comes for a little while sees very far, much more than the people who are local. I have been here a few times, and I've always been very, very impressed with this community. And I have to tell you, if you can close your ears for a minute, you have...
Make sure it's being recorded, please.
You have one of the greatest teachers that Chabad and maybe the Jewish people has in the world right here in this living room. So I want you to know that Baruch Hashem, I have tremendous respect for Rabbi Hecht and Mrs. Hecht and for the whole community here. So this is a really wonderful L'chaim.
You can go home now. It was very good. it was really, really good. Thank you.
And that was the end of the lecture.
That was it.
So there's a lot to talk about. There's an interesting, I heard this from Rabbi Greenberg, interesting story. In 1976, a plane was hijacked, and the terrorists allowed all the passengers to go home except for the Israeli citizens and the Jews, and they were kept hostage in Entebbe, about 100 people, unless Israel would release 45 terrorists, murderers, whatever. Otherwise, they were going to kill the Jews. Israel made a daring rescue, one of the greatest rescues in history. 2,500 miles they traveled, and they came there, and they rescued the people. The commander of that rescue was Yoni Netanyahu, Bibi's brother, Alav Hashalom, and he was killed right at the beginning. He died even before the operation happened. The operation was successful otherwise. They came back, and Yoni was buried. Yoni had been had done a lot of things in 1973. That's why he was chosen to be the commander, apparently. And at his funeral, many people were giving eulogies, talking about him. One general said at his funeral a very interesting thing. He said, "You see what a great leader he was. Because usually when the commander dies, then the troops are in disarray. They have no commander, they have no one to talk to, no one guiding them, and therefore they usually, at that point, that's the end of the operation." He said here, he died before the operation even started, and yet he had inspired them and taught them so well that they were able to continue the operation without him.
That's a good word.
That's a good word. Moshe Rabbeinu, what was Moshe Rabbeinu's job? Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, we read in this week's Parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu took the Yidden out of Egypt. Last week's Parsha's Boy took the Yidden out of Egypt. And what was the purpose to go out of Egypt? Hashem said, take the Jewish people out of Egypt and bring them to the land, receive the Torah, and then to the land that I promised them. Moshe Rabbeinu, if you look at conventional wisdom, Moshe Rabbeinu failed miserably. He died in the desert. He didn't take the Jews into Israel. He didn't fulfill his job. But in fact, it's not the way it is at all. As a matter of fact, Yeshua took the Jews into Eretz Yisrael, and the Jews went and captured the land and inhabited the land. And every day, to this day, we live with Moshe Rabbeinu. In every moment of our lives, we live with Moshe Rabbeinu. We learn the Torah of Moshe. We do the mitzvahs that Moshe taught us. Moshe is very much with us every moment, even though he didn't physically take the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael. We are today celebrating the 70th anniversary of Yud Shevat, Tafshin Yud, when the previous Rebbe passed away and the Rebbe became Rebbe. A point of order, the Rebbe didn't officially accept the leadership until a year later. And there's many stories about how that happened. We can talk about that maybe in a little bit, but nevertheless, we count the Rebbe's leadership from day one, 1950. Because in 1950, already it was clear that the Rebbe was the Rebbe. There was no other choice. There was no other question. And And technically, the Rebbe already started doing things, even though he wasn't officially the Rebbe. He started doing things that showed that he was taking the leadership. Anyway, and you can't have a vacuum. So definitely, it's 70 years. So people ask the question: 70 years of leadership. How can he say 70 years of leadership if 25 years ago was the Rebbe's yahrzeit? We just had the 25th yahrzeit of the Rebbe. And the answer is very, very clear. Look at. By the way, there is an ancient Hasidic tradition that goes back since the beginning of the Hasidic movement to put phones on silent. Yes.
You know what the proof is? There was never a cell phone by a Farbrengen.
That's right.
You never heard it.
That's right. That's right.
It's conclusive.
You know the story, don't you? That in France, the people were digging in France and they found wires 20 feet down. And they realized that there'd been wires there, wired communication 100 years ago. And then in Germany they were digging and they found even deeper and they said, we had wire communication even more than that. In Israel they dug and they found nothing. He said, you see, we had wireless going back thousands of years. Anyway, so here we are 25 years later. Not only does the Rebbe's leadership continue, but we see the Rebbe's leadership growing exponentially. We see the impact that the Rebbe has every single day on the entire world. The Chabad movement has grown by leaps and bounds, more than doubled since then. The teachings of the Rebbe now, you can find them in so many different ways, so many different svarim and videos and explanations of the Rebbe's teachings. And the Rebbe's impact is felt not only on Yidden all over the world, but even on the non-Jews also all over the world in many different ways. So we see that the Rebbe's leadership, definitely we could say 70 years of leadership, there's no question about it. And just as we said that Moshe Rabbeinu, his job was to take into Eretz Yisrael, he himself physically didn't finish the job, but the job was done by Yeshua and by the Yidden, and his influence continues. The Rebbe, when he first became Rebbe, he made it very clear that our job of this generation, Dar HaShvi, the 7th generation of Chabad, is to transform the world into a home for Hashem and to bring Mashiach. And definitely this is still going on. This work is happening. And we have that charge to continue doing this. And to the extent that we will follow the Rebbe's teachings, we are continuing to do this and we will finish the job. We're just about there. And we're almost there. And the Rebbe is still leading us, still guiding us, and this will bring us to Mashiach. L'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim, l'chaim. You have a nice nigga?
When the Rebbe became Rebbe, when he accepted the leadership officially in Tafshin Yud Aleph in 1951, the Rebbe said that in America you have to make a statement, and the statement has to be a shocking statement. And the Rebbe's statement was that there's love of Hashem, love of the Torah, and love of Yidden, and that all three are connected and you can't separate the three. This is something that the Rebbe taught us. It's in Torah, it's in Chassidus, everything the Rebbe taught. By the way, it was amazing how the Rebbe would say something, a new idea in Chassidus, and he would show us the sources in Gemara and in Nigla, and the Rebbe connected everything together. But the Rebbe said, the Rebbe throughout his Nasius and continues to teach us this idea that you can't separate the love of every Jew from the love of the Torah and the love of Hashem. It all goes together. In the Mimer, so I'm going to I'll come back to this. The previous Rebbe, before he passed away, I'm sure everybody knows this, the previous Rebbe, before he passed away, wrote a Mimer to be learned on the day that he passed away, and subsequently on a few days later. He wrote it to be learned on Yud Shevat and Yud Gimel Shevat, etc. There were 4 Maimarim. Each Maimar, everyone knows what Maimar is, right?
Sure.
Yeah. 4 Maimarim. I don't know where I come from. I have to translate everything. Not everyone, but
yeah, but we wouldn't mind an explanation. but we're curious to hear the way you understand Weimar.
I don't know if I understand.
We all know, but let's hear what you have to say.
You know that a Maimar, the Rebbe, there's Torah taught all the time by great tzaddikim, and the Rebbe would say many sichas and many teachings, but a Maimar is something completely different.
Well, what is it?
A Maimar is the idea of new Torah that's being revealed at that moment. Every Torah that is taught by a tzaddik is, of course, from Moshe Rabbeinu, but it's the first time this Torah has been revealed in the world. It's a new light of Torah in the world. We know that the Rebbe, when he would say a Maimar, would put a handkerchief around his hands, and Chassidim say the reason was in order to hold himself down into Gashmias. Because during the Maimar, the Rebbe would be in different worlds. I witnessed many times. The Rebbe would say, many times the Rebbe would say a Maimar, a full Maimar, which was they would sing the Maimar Nigun beforehand, and then the Rebbe would say a Maimar in the Nigun, in the tune of a Maimar, in that tune. But there was also on a regular Shabbos, the Rebbe would Farbrengen on a regular Shabbos, he would say what's called a Maimar Ke'ein Sicha. It was a Maimar, but it was in the tune of a Sicha, and it sounded like a Sicha, but it was a Maimar. How could you tell if it was a Maimar or a Sicha? There was no Nigun beforehand. When you would see, the Rebbe would put a handkerchief on his hand, you knew that he was saying a Maimar. The Maimar is And you know, I grew up.
Can I add one
Yeah,
thing?
please.
A mimer is a revelation of a godly truth.
A revelation of a godly truth is a great way of saying it. Shkar.
Really relatable.
Of course. Now we know.
Very good. Very good. Very, very good. So, you know, when you learn a mimer, Reb Mendel Futterfass, who was a great chassid and a great man, he was the mashpia in Kfar Chabad. He once told me, I came to him to ask him a question on a mimer. He said, how many times have you learned the mimer? I said, this is the second time I'm learning it. He says, no. You have to learn a mimer 5 times before you know which questions to ask. Before you know what you don't understand. That's what he told me. So basically he was telling me your question is not a question about the mimer, it's a question of just lack of knowledge completely. You don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, so mimer said that the previous Rebbe wrote 4 mimarim to be learned, and the first one happened to be learned on Shevat, which was the day he passed away. And that mimer has 20, each mimer has 5 chapters, which makes it 20 chapters. Beginning in 1941, the Rebbe started explaining the mimer. Every year he would explain one of the chapters of the mimer. So if we go back, now it's 2020. So if we go back to 20 years ago, each 20 years. So now, if the Rebbe would be continuing the cycle of teaching the Maimarim, he would be teaching the 10th chapter this year. So what we do now in preparation for Yud Shvat, many people have been studying the Maimar of Tafshin Chaf, the Maimar of 1960, and the Maimar of 1980 of Tafshin Mem. So in the Maimar of Tafshin Chaf, no, I'll go first to Tafshin Mem. In the Maimar of Tafshin Mem, the Rebbe talks about what the previous Rebbe talked about, the fact that, and this is based also on a Maimar of the Alter Rebbe, that the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, were called Tzivos Hashem, the army of Hashem. What does it mean, the army of Hashem? And he comments on the fact that the word Tzivakos Hashem is also called, one of the names of Hashem is Tzivos, and if Yoel can say Tzivos, I can too. So he says the name is Tzivos, it's a name of Hashem, but it's a name that's not mentioned at all in the Torah. This is a name that was given by the Nevi'im, by the prophets. The first one who called Hashem by the name Tzivos was Chana. And then Hashem said to Chana, your son will use this name to prophesy. And in fact, Shmuel, Chana's son, said, Kayom Hashem Tzivakos, so says Hashem Tzivos. And later, the later prophets used the word Tzivos. But in the Torah, the word Tzivos is not used. Nevertheless, the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, were called Tzivos Hashem. Why were they called Tzivos Hashem? So there are several explanations. It goes into, I don't want to talk about the whole thing, it's a lot of explanation. But one thing, the Rebbe says, there are 3 interpretations of the word Tzivos, and one of them means Tzivyon. What is the meaning of Tzivyon? Tzivyon means beauty. But the kind of beauty that comes from a multicolored thing. If you have a single color, no matter how nice and pretty the color is, it's not real beauty. Real beauty comes about when you have many different colors. And then when you have many colors, each of the colors looks more beautiful because it's part of this beautiful tapestry of many different colors. And the Rebbe says this is the beauty, this is why the Jewish people were called Tzivos Hashem, because they are tzivya in the beauty of Hashem, because when they left Egypt, and among the Yidden throughout our generations, there are many different types of Jews. There are those Yidden who are involved in wisdom, and they're very wise people and learn Torah deeply. There are those Yidden who are involved in doing mitzvahs. There are those Yidden who are more simple. But the beauty of the Jewish people is that we have all the Yidden together, and every Jew together is part of the Jewish people. This is what makes us beautiful. So when Jewish people come together, when Yidden come together, especially by a Farbrengen, that is to celebrate the leadership of the Rebbe, as we'll soon say, which has transformed the world completely. And here we are all together, different places, different countries, men, women, children, and everyone with different ideas, but yet we come together for a Farbrengen like this. This is Tzivos Hashem. This is the beauty of the Jewish people. So the very fact that we come together like this is a wonderful thing. L'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim. L'chaim l'bracha.
So this is the idea. The Rebbe said, throughout his life was teaching us about how we have to love every Jew. You know, there was, you all know probably, you all saw it, there was a Siyam HaShas. You were talking about the Siyam HaShas, were you there, or you just saw it? Siyam HaShas, 100,000 people there in a stadium, huh?
Next time.
It's a shame. 100,000 people there, celebrating the conclusion of learning the Shas. People from all over.
8 minutes.
It was an amazing thing. If you do the Shas in 8 minutes every day, then you can only attend a tenth of the Siyam HaShas.
You only get to the front door. They don't let you in. You know.
Anyway, so the Siyam HaShas, Jews came from all over to celebrate. It was a beautiful Kiddush Hashem. And at the Siyam HaShas, there's a picture, an iconic picture of a Lubavitcher Chassid putting on tefillin with a Jew there at the Siyam HaShas. So I was actually seeing there was a lot of back and forth. People were talking about how come the guy didn't put on tefillin, whatever. So I wrote. This is what I thought about it. I said it doesn't matter who put on tefillin or didn't put on tefillin. What matters is 100,000 Jews came together to celebrate Torah, and one Jew had such avos Yisrael that he cared about the spirituality of another Jew and offered him to put on tefillin. And this was what the Rebbe taught us. The Rebbe taught us that it's not about me. And this is a very important theme that the Rebbe taught. It's not about me. How great can I grow in Yiddishkeit? If I sit and learn all day, I can become a great Torah scholar. If I do great mitzvahs all day, it's a wonderful thing. And you know what? We have to learn Torah all day, and we have to do mitzvahs all day. And we have to give tzedakah, and we have to do everything we have to do. Everything. But when another Yid is drowning, it's not the time for us at this moment to open a Gemara and say, I have to learn my Gemara, or Chassidus, or whatever it is, or whatever. When a Yid is drowning, the first thing you do is you close your Gemara, you run outside, and you save the Jew from drowning. To the extent that even if it affects my ability to grow spiritually, it doesn't matter, because this is what we have to do. But the fact is, the truth is that the spirituality doesn't suffer. Because ultimately the greatness of a Yid is when he helps another Yid, that is the greatness, and that is the greatest thing we can do. Moshe Rabbeinu taught us that. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he's standing in front of the burning bush, for 7 days, he's arguing with Hashem and says, I don't want to go. I just want you to think about this for a minute. Just think for a minute. Hashem appears to you. By the way, they say if you speak to God, you're religious. If God speaks to you, you're crazy. But let's just imagine that Hashem appeared to you and said to you, I have a mission for you, a shlichus, I'm sending you on a shlichus. You know, the Rebbe would call people in the beginning of the Nesias. So a couple would get married and they would write to the Rebbe, we want to go on shlichus. And then one day Rabbi Chadakov would call a young man in and say, we'd like to suggest to you that you should go to Timbuktu. And the Chassid would say yes. It happened once, the Chassid came to Rabbi Chadakov, called him in, and he said, I want you to go, I don't know where the place was, to a certain place. And he said, I have to talk to my wife. I have to check with my wife. And he walked out. And as he walked out, he closed the door, and he realized he'd made a mistake. So he went back right away and he said, I'm ready to go. And he saw Rabbi Chadakov hanging up the phone. Rabbi Chadakov said, it's okay, we'll find someone else. This is the commitment. And by the way, I have to digress. Does this mean you don't have to ask your wife when you're doing something? It doesn't mean that. It means that the chassid and his wife should have already agreed in advance. And if they had not committed to each other, that if Rabbi Chadakov calls them in and says go, they would both agree to go, then they shouldn't be going. I think this is what it means. In other words, they hadn't committed together properly. Anyway, so the Rebbe says, go, you go. Now imagine the Eibishter himself comes to you and says, go. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest tzaddik who ever lived. When he was born, the room was filled with light. He wouldn't nurse from a Goyish mother, and that's why they knew he was a Jewish kid, and they had to bring the Jewish mother to nurse him. This is Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem no for 6 days, standing and arguing with Hashem? How could that be? Hashem said to Avraham Avinu, go sacrifice your son. He said, yes. He says to Moshe, go save the people. He says, no. So what does that mean? Ever thought about that? How could it happen? What was that?
He fell to his wife? Different time, different...
He didn't ask his wife even after 7 days. He eventually said yes without asking his wife. And I'm sure Sapara was thrilled to have the shlichus.
I was so thrilled. She said, wait.
All right. No, that was later. When she found out what it was really like. A lot of women, they go on shlichus and then they find out what it's really like. Baruch Hashem, they don't beforehand. Anyway, so here's an answer that I heard from the Rebbe. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he was not going to be the Mashiach. He knew that his redemption was not going to be the last one. And Moshe Rabbeinu cared about the Yidden. And Moshe Rabbeinu wanted Hashem to send Mashiach. So Shlach na biyad tishlach. Please send the one you're going to send. Rashi says it means send Mashiach. So Moshe Rabbeinu put aside his own everything. He even was willing to argue with Hashem. Why? Because all he cared about was the Yidden. And therefore he wanted for the Yidden the best. And therefore he said, send Mashiach, don't send me. And he was willing to argue with Hashem because of that. We find that among the tzaddikim, the great tzaddikim would argue with Hashem when it came to protecting the Yidden. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was attacked many times by many people. Leaders, Jewish leaders attacked him and said horrible things about him, and he never responded. But if any of these same people spoke against another Jew, there was one particular person who got on TV in Israel for 45 minutes berating kibbutznikim and saying they're not really Jewish. And the Rebbe spoke fire de kesicha, and I'll tell you, the Rebbe got tremendous flack from this. And anybody who spoke against a fellow Jew, and we're talking about Jews who were not religious Jews, but the Rebbe stood up for them and refused to accept that. Because the Rebbe loved every Jew and cared about every Jew. And this is what the Rebbe taught us. That we need to care about every Jew. And this is why today there are shluchim all over the world. And there are Farbrengens like this happening all over the world in places where 70 years ago, you would say that in Palo Alto, in San Francisco, there would be a Farbrengen like this. San Francisco, who would ever think of such a thing? But the Rebbe cares about every single Jew, and therefore he told his Chassidim, don't sit at home and become great scholars. Absolutely become great scholars, yes, but not at the expense of other Jews. Go out, and if you have to teach someone Aleph Beis, you teach someone Aleph Beis. And this is what the Rebbe taught. And the Rebbe taught not only that his shluchim should do it, but the Rebbe said every Jew is a shliach, that the shluchim should inspire others. This is what, the chief rabbi, the former chief rabbi of England said many times. He said, leaders inspire followers. He says, great leaders inspire leaders, that the Rebbe inspired everyone to be a leader. The Rebbe taught each of us to bring out that we have incredible power, incredible strength. Every Jew has incredible koyach. And this brings me to a piece of the Maimer of Tafshin Chaf. In the Maimer in 1950, the Rebbe spoke about the idea of humility. Let's say L'chaim, let's sing a niggun, and then I'll talk about the humility that the Rebbe talks about. Because I want to talk, that's actually a very important subject. I want you to think about, after the niggun, we'll talk about this more. I want you to think about, what do you think is the greatest Yetzer Hara today? Every generation has its big Yetzer Hara. In the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the big Yetzer Hara was idol worship. They had a tremendous desire for idol worship. In other times, they had other Yetzer Haras. I want to hear from you a little bit what you think. I have an opinion what the greatest Yetzer Hara is today. After we sing a niggun, let's sing a niggun and we'll sing.
It has to be GE rated though, the Yetzer Hara.
The Yetzer Hara that I think about is very G-rated. Believe me.
I just want to mention it. That's all. Yeah.
And by the way, I think, all the Yetzer Haras that we know about happened in all generations. I'm talking about a Yetzer Hara that I think is very specific in our generation, a lot more than in the past.
Okay.
I'll be back in a minute. What do you think is the biggest Yetzer Hara today? Yes. Arrogance. Okay. Yes.
Phones,
Okay.
internet, wireless.
Wireless internet. Okay. What else? Don't talk too loud. I live, my parnasa comes from, a lot of our parnasa comes from there. By the way, I have to tell you my favorite engineer story. It's got nothing to do with what we're talking about.
They're used to that. I always say stuff has nothing to do with anything. Yeah.
So there was if anyone is queasy, you have to close your ears. So there was an executioner who used to kill people by guillotine. And he was especially sadistic. He used to lay his victims down face up so they could see the knife coming down. I told you, if you're queasy, don't listen. It's just a joke. All right. So one day he has 3 people he has to execute: a lawyer, and a doctor, and an engineer. He lays the lawyer down, sets up the knife, presses the button, and the knife gets stuck 1 inch above the lawyer's neck. The lawyer says, according to the law, in this book, it says, according to the law, if I don't die, when you hit the button, you got to let me go. He checks the book, and he says, yeah, you're right. So he lets him go. He resets it, lays the doctor down, hits the button. The knife gets stuck 1 inch above the doctor's neck. He says to the doctor says, hey, you let the lawyer go, you got to let me go. He lets him go. He lays the engineer down, he's about to hit the button. The engineer says, wait a second, I see the problem. That's my life. That's who I live with. Anyway, so Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of engineers in town. Baruch Hashem, it's a beautiful place. It's a wonderful place. This is the place where this is the place of startups and disruptions, and here everything goes. And I was thinking about this. When it comes to Yiddishkeit, when it comes to Torah, when it comes to be Mekarav a Jew, there are the ways to do it, but over here we can always think of new ways. That's what we do. We have disruptions, we have new ideas. And this phone, which some people said is the biggest Yetzer Hara, this phone, I will tell you, can be used. If it's used properly, like the Rebbe said, everything can be used for the service of Hashem. If you use it properly, it can be used for the service of Hashem. It is actually a big Yetzer Hara, but that's not the biggest Yetzer Hara. Here's my opinion what the biggest Yetzer Hara today is. 5 words. I am not good enough. In my opinion, that is the biggest Yetzer Hara today. And by the way, the 5 words are the antithesis of 5 words that Reb Nissen Nemanov. Anyone heard of Reb Nissen Nemanov? Reb Nissen Nemanov was someone that the Rebbe referred to as a Beinani. Reb Nissen Nemanov was the mashpia of the yeshiva in Brunois in France. He came from Russia with the yeshiva, and I studied with him for 2.5 years. He was an amazing, amazing person. So on Shevat, he used to Farbrengen every year, and he would talk about 5 words that the previous Rebbe said in his mimer. Ha'im yesh eza chachma, no, 6 words, sorry. Ha'im yesh eza chachma ba'anhaga kazu. The previous Rebbe says that when you're thinking of doing something, you should always think, is there any wisdom in this behavior? And if you think about those 6 words, your whole life will change. Ha'im yesh eza chachma. So I have 5 words in the Yetzer Hara. The 5 years, I am not good enough. That is the biggest Yetzer Hara. People say it who are not connected to Yiddishkeit, and you tell them, come put on tefillin, I'm not religious. I'm not good enough. You tell someone to come to shul, I don't know how to do that. I'm not good enough. You tell someone to learn, sit down and learn every day, what do I know? I don't know the Torah. You tell someone who is religious to do something a little bit more, to attend the Farbrengen, to learn some Chassidus, what do I know? You tell someone, go out and help another Jew. Who am I? What do I know? You're a shliach, you're a rabbi, what do I know? I'm not good enough. The fact is that I'm not good enough, I believe, is the biggest Yetzer Hara today, because people think that they don't have any power to do anything. So I'm going to tell you a story.
Rabbi Levin?
Yes.
I think also people often say, I don't know enough.
Which is all part of the same idea, 100%.
I don't know enough.
So the Rebbe said, if you know Aleph, teach someone Aleph. You know Aleph and Beis, teach someone Beis. If you know Aleph, teach someone Aleph. Right. I'm not good enough, I don't know enough, etc. So I will tell you a story that happened to me. So, you know that when the Rebbe stopped having Yechidus, and I think it was 1980. And it was a personal, I don't want to use the word tragedy, but for me and my wife, it was a personal, very, very difficult thing. We did have Yechidus before we got married, but when we went out on Shlichus, at that point the Rebbe had stopped giving Yechidus, so we did not have a Yechidus with the Rebbe right before we went out on Shlichus. We did say...
Yechidus means private audience.
Private audience with the Rebbe, yeah, that's what Yechidus means. And to be with the Rebbe privately, I had a few Yechidus with the Rebbe. When the Rebbe stopped having Yechidus, the Rebbe said, people wrote to the Rebbe and said, we need Yechidus, we're missing Yechidus. So the Rebbe said, nowadays Yechidus is by the Farbrengen. By the Farbrengen, the Rebbe had private audiences. So I'm going to digress and tell you a story that I heard from a good friend of mine, Mr. Herschel Picard, who lives in New York now. He grew up in London. Remember Herschel from London? You were a little kid then, probably. He was a chazan. He lived in London, and he used to come to my house. My father, Alav Shalom, was a big chazan, and he used to come to my house, and I used to hear him practicing. My father would help him with his voice lessons. So anyway, so he came. He was once in New York I was in New York then. I was learning in Yeshiva in New York, and he came to New York for Tishrei, and he was there for several weeks. And usually, when visiting chazanim would come, they would invite them to lead the davening. But the whole Tishrei, he didn't daven. So I went over to him and I said, how come I didn't hear you the whole Tishrei, you didn't daven? He says, I don't daven by the Rebbe anymore. I said, why not? He says, a couple of years ago he was davening, and in the middle of the quiet Shemona Esrei, his mind started wandering. They tell the story about, this is the Jacobson story, they tell the story about, there was a Poritz. You know what a Poritz is? A Poritz, the landowners in Poland and Russia who used to own the land, and they had people working for them, and they could do whatever. They could throw you into a dungeon, they could execute you, they didn't like you, whatever. So once a chassid of a Rebbe comes to his Rebbe, and he was the manager of the Poritz's estate, and he said, the Poritz wants to speak to me. I'm terrified. What should I do, Rebbe? What should I do if he says this to me? The Rebbe says, if he says this, you say that. Well, what if he says that to me? He says, if he says that, you tell him this, etc., etc. He says, and then he comes, what if the Poritz says this and that? He comes with some outlandish idea to him, accusation. He says, he doesn't daven Shemona Esrei. He doesn't have such an imagination like you do. He's not going to come up with that. Anyway, so he's in the middle of davening, and his mind wandered. He started thinking about his business. And he started thinking about this and that and the other, a whole string of thoughts that went through his mind during the Shemona Esrei. After davening, that Shabbos, there was a Farbrengen. The Rebbe had a Farbrengen on Shabbos afternoon. And during the Farbrengen, the Rebbe started talking about Avodas HaTfilah, the importance of concentrating during davening. And the Rebbe said, sometimes it happens that a businessman is davening and his mind wanders and he starts thinking about this and then he starts thinking about that. And the Rebbe went through the entire chain of thoughts that went through his mind during davening. He says, that's it. I'm not davening by the Rebbe anymore. So I had at least three times when I knew that the Rebbe was speaking to me directly to me by the Farbrengen, and I felt that was a Yechidus to me. One of those times was in 1986. I believe it was 86 or 87. I think it was 86. We had purchased the property of Chabad in Palo Alto. We paid $285,000 for it. for a half an acre of land in Palo Alto. Should have bought up the whole Palo Alto. Should have, we didn't. But it was so bad. The situation was so bad. We had no money. We couldn't afford the mortgage. We were in foreclosure. It was a terrible situation, and things was very difficult. And I was so fayakt. And number one, and number two, it was a very difficult place. The Yiddishkeit there was so tough, so difficult. And I was talking to people and trying to have an impact on people. And I felt like we did have a minyan, Baruch Hashem, we had a small group of people, but the impact outside was not happening. And I didn't know what to do. And I tried this and tried that, and it just wasn't happening. And I was feeling pretty down. And I came to the Rebbe for the last days of Pesach. At that time there was a young bacher, Dr. Landis' son, Yeshua Landis, was visiting his father, and he took over, and I went to New York with my wife, my family. We went to New York. So I'm by the Rebbe for Achon Shel Pesach, And after Achon Shepesach, the Rebbe used to give out wine from his Havdalah cup, his benching and Havdalah cup, to everybody who would come. And he would also give out bottles of wine to certain people. So when I came up to the Rebbe to get kosher bracha, Rabbi Grona said, "This is the shliach of Palo Alto." The Rebbe took out a bottle of wine and gave it to me, and he spoke very loud because there was a lot of noise in the room. Fatzlacha Rabbi in ganzen Stadt. You should have great success in the whole city. So that already lifted me up. I knew that's it. Everything's going to be good from now. Shabbos after Pesach, the Rebbe spoke a sicha. The Rebbe often on the Shabbos after a holiday would fill in things that he hadn't finished at the Farbrengen of the Yom Tov. So Shabbos then he spoke about the haftarah of the Shabbos Chol HaMoed of Pesach. Anybody know what the haftarah of Shabbos Chol HaMoed Pesach is? I always ask this question whenever I tell the story. And every second or third Farbrengen, one person knows what it is.
Dry bones.
The dry bones, very good. The rabbi knows.
Cheating, it's over my head.
Yeah. So there's a story that there was the Navi, Yecheskel, right? Navi Yecheskel looked out and he saw a valley full of dry bones. And he says he saw the valley was, Hashem says, what do you see? He says, I see the bones, v'hine yeveshois ma'od, and behold, they are very dry. And Hashem says, Hatechyena hayatzomes ha'ela, can these bones come to life? And he says, well, I don't know, you know. So Hashem says, Hinave ala hatzomes ha'ela, prophesy on these bones, Shimu dvar Hashem, listen to the word of Hashem. And the Rebbe said, there is a young man who is in a valley which is full of bones. The Jews there are like dry bones. There's no Yiddishkeit, there's no life in these bones. And not just bones, not just dry bones. Yeveshus ma'od, very dry bones. How do you bring these Yidden back to life? Shimu dvar Hashem, tell them a word of Torah. Tell them a word of Hashem. That's how you bring them back to life. You know how it says about Yaakov? It says that Yaakov, after he had the dream with the ladder, Vayiso Yaakov Raglov. Yaakov lifted up his feet. What does it mean? He lifted up his feet. How did he lift up his feet? So Rashi says that he when someone is very happy and is lifted up, he's like elevated. He was walking. I walked away from that Farbrengen, inches above the ground. People who know me from then, I came back, I was a different person. I felt the Rebbe was talking to me. I was fired up. I was the dry bones that the Rebbe gave life to, right? And I came back, and you know, I used to meet with people all the time. I had friends that I would meet with. So I go to visit with them. There's one guy who had an auto repair store. How did I meet him? I took my car. I had a problem. Rabbi Kunin, when I first came to town, Rabbi Kunin gave me a car. It was a used car. It was a good car. But after a couple of months, the transmission was having trouble. So I took it into my mechanic. He says, you got to go to Amco. So I drove down to Sunnyvale to Amco, which was like 15 minutes drive away. And I come into this place, and the guy lifts up the mechanic lifts up the thing. He takes off the plate, and he says, you see, this is not good. Another guy comes out, and he looks at me, and he says, what are you doing here? And I said, are you Jewish? He said, yeah. I said, well, I told him, the Rebbe sent me, and I came here to help people, to bring people close to Judaism. He says, you got a lot of pushkas around here? I said, not really. He says, you're going to need a lot of pushkas for this one. He says, the transmission is shot. You need a new transmission. He looks at the engine. He looks at the mechanic. He says, I'll take care of you. Write him up, no charge. Wow. And he did the transmission for no charge. By the way, if you want, this was like in the wintertime before Pesach. I ordered 40 pounds of shmura matzah. I want you to know that every penny was so exact that there was time we didn't have food on the table. It was so difficult. Today, Baruch Hashem, shluchim still struggle. And every penny that you give a shliach, every penny to tzedakah that people give to a Chabad house is used, and more so. Because we're always ahead of the game and we're always catching up, and every penny you give to a shliach goes to help tremendous, tremendous work. I'm sure you're all supporting Rabbi Hecht's work here. It's amazing, but we all struggle. But there were times, in those days, the name of Chabad was not what it is today. Today, anyone in the world you ask, what is Chabad, they'll tell you. They either love us, they hate us, or they don't know exactly what we do. But there's no one in the world who doesn't know what Chabad is in the Jewish world. Everyone knows Chabad. In those days, Chabad was some Orthodox cult that throws stones at Jews in Israel. That's what people thought. Anyway, so I Pasha didn't have money, but I bought matzah exactly as much as I needed, and I bought an extra box to give this guy as a gift because he'd done the free transmission for me. So I bring him the box a week before Pesach to give him a gift of shmura matzah. He opens up the box, starts eating it, and says, "Oh, this tastes really good." So I used to come visit him once a month or so. I used to have my rounds. I would go visit people, and in his office, whenever I came, he would turn the calendars around. And because I came in, and we would both sit with our feet up on his desk, and I would sip coffee and we would talk. So I come to his place, I put my feet up on the desk, but this guy, this is one of the guys I felt I was not getting anywhere with him. And I said to him, "Hey, do you know what the Parsha says this week?" And he says, "What's a Parsha?" And I thought to myself, my goodness, I've known this guy for a couple of years. I never talked to him about the Parsha. Talking about the Parsha. Oh, interesting. The next time I came, we talked about Asicha, this and that and the other. And shortly after that, he had a baby girl, and he called me, he says, "I want to come and name the baby at Chabad." This was like a huge deal for him to name the baby, give the baby a Jewish name at Chabad. And this is what I did. This is something that every single Jew can do. Every one of us. We are a lamp. We are a light. The Rebbe inspired every one of us to find our neshama that's within us and to reveal the neshama. But who are we? Who am I? You know what? It doesn't matter who you are. You have a job to do, and that is to teach another Jew a piece of Torah. You teach another Jew a word of Torah. You're in business. You're meeting a Jew. You're on the street, in the supermarket. You meet a Jew. You tell him something, a word. Find a way. Whenever I meet a Jew, no matter what it's about, I always find a way to say something. Someone tells me some interesting thing. I say, "Oh, you know, the Gemara says about that." Just to fit in something, a word of Torah, and it's incredible how it illuminates people. Which brings me to what I started saying about humility. So in the first mimer that we learned, Tafshin Chaf, in 1950 mimer, the Rebbe quotes the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov talks about humility. And he says, when humility is misplaced, the humility takes us away from the service of Hashem. Misplaced humility is a terrible thing. And he gives an example. The Gemara tells us the story about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. You remember the story about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? So very briefly, the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. This is in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, when the Jewish people the Romans were ruling over Eretz Yisrael, and there was a lot of strife among the Jews, and a very, very wealthy, prominent man made a big dinner, and he invited all the Gedolim, all the heads of the community came to the dinner, and he also sent a message to his good friend Kamsa to be invited to the dinner. And it's in those days, if there would have been cell phones in those days, he would have sent to Kamsa, he would have sent the thing to Bar Kamsa would have sent him back, "Are you sure you got the right guy?" But the message went to Bar Kamsa instead of Kamsa, and Bar Kamsa was his enemy. Kamsa was his friend, and Bar Kamsa was his enemy. And Bar Kamsa was invited instead of Kamsa. So he thought, oh, he's invited, so he came. Bar Kamsa came to the dinner. The guy's walking around to see his guests. He says, "Hey, what the heck are you doing here? Get out. You're my enemy. Get out." So Bar Kamsa said, "Listen, I'm already here. Let me stay. Please don't embarrass me." He said, "No, get out." He says, "Listen, I'll pay for my meal." "No, get out." He said, "I'll pay for half the dinner, half the cost of the dinner. Please don't embarrass me." He said, "No, get out." He said, "I'll pay for the whole cost of the dinner." He says, "No, get out." And he kicked him out, and picked him up and threw him out, and none of the sages at the table said anything. And Bar Kamsa said, since all the sages said nothing, that means they all agree with this. I'm going to tell the king something bad about them, and I'm going to teach him a lesson. So he went to the Roman emperor. He told the emperor, "The Jews have rebelled against you." He says, "How do you know? Prove it." "I'll prove it." He says, "Give me an animal to offer in the Beis HaMikdash in the temple, and you'll see." So he took an animal. He gave him an animal. He took the animal, and we do accept sacrifices from non-Jews also. But he made a mum, he made a blemish on the animal, that we would consider a blemish and the non-Jews wouldn't consider a blemish. When they came to the Beis HaMikdash, the Jews didn't know what to do. To offer the sacrifice, it has a blemish. To not offer the sacrifice, the guy's going to go back and tell the king they rebelled, and it's danger for the whole Jewish community. So they decided we should offer the sacrifice anyway, because even though it's got a blemish, the danger to the Jewish people outweighs everything, right? Chas v'shalom, danger to life outweighs everything, so we should offer it. So Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulis, one of the sages there, said, no, you can't do that, because they'll say that you're allowed to offer a blemish sacrifice on the Mizbeach. So they said, okay, in that case, if we can't do that, we should execute him. Because he's going to go back, because, to protect the Jewish people. If someone is about to kill other people, you're allowed to execute him. Let's execute him. So Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkula said, no, then people will think and say that the punishment for making a blemish in a sacrifice is execution. You can't do that. So they let him go, and he went back to the king. And he told the king, and because of that, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the siege was made around Jerusalem, Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the Jews were sent away, and the Talmud says, because of the humility, and Visanusay, because of the humility of Reb Zechariah ben Avkulis, that our land was taken away, the temple was destroyed, the people were sent into exile, hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed because of his humility. What humility did he have? Why is that humility? What's the humility here? Huh? What? No, not humility. The humility of the rabbi who said not to execute him and not to offer the sacrifice. What's the humility? So the Baal Shem Tov says, I'm not sure if the Baal Shem Tov says it or the Rebbe is talking about what the Baal Shem Tov says. So the Baal Shem Tov says, false humility. He did not recognize the power of his words, of his actions. He didn't realize that his action is going to affect the entire Jewish people. He thought he was making a little decision here. And his decision was a decision. He didn't see the big picture and the fact that what he did affected the whole future of the Jewish people. And the Rebbe says that's the same with every single Jew. Every single Jew. When we learn Torah, it says like this. It says, Hayosheves Baganim, the one who sits. Baganim means in gardens. Chaverim makshivim l'koilech. Friends are listening to your voice. Hashmini, let me hear your voice. It says that in Shir Hashirim. So many explanations in this. In the Maimer, the Rebbe talks about what does this mean. Hayosheves Baganim, the Jewish people who are living in many gardens, in other people's countries, in Golus, in exile all over the world. These Jewish people, Chaverim makshivim, the angels are listening to what we say, to the words of Torah. We are in Golus, but nevertheless we learn Torah and we do mitzvahs. The angels of the worlds above are listening to what we say. And what that means is when we learn Torah in this world, even though we're in Golus, we are impacting the angels, not just the angels, but all the worlds. And as a matter of fact, it says in the second Maimer that when we learn Torah and do a mitzvah in this physical world, we are connecting this world with the essence of Hashem. Something that couldn't have happened before the Torah was given. It didn't happen at all. Getting back to why were the Jewish people called Tzivas Hashem, the army of Hashem? Because when the Torah was given, we now have the opportunity to bring Hashem into everything in the world. The army means the people, the world, that we connected to Hashem, because every Jew, when we learn Torah, we bring the essence of Hashem into the world. This is the power that every single Jew has. So if a person doesn't realize the power that we have, what's going to happen? I don't care. I'm not going to learn Torah this minute. I'm not going to do this mitzvah. Why? Well, who cares? What do you mean, who cares? Don't be so humble. Hashem cares. The world cares. The future cares. Everything cares. Everything is extremely important, because when we do a mitzvah, we have the ability to bring Hashem into the world, to bring the unity of Hashem into the world. This is what it's all about. So this is what he says in the Maimer, that we should never say, I'm not good enough. If you think about it, they talk about the Russian army. A lot of times we talk about the Russian army, because the Russian, Chassidus grew up in Russia. And the Russian army was very famous. A lot of Yidden had to be sent to the Russian army, unfortunately. And Yidden came back from the army. We heard about the army. So what happens in the army? They have inspections. So they inspect all the soldiers. The general comes and inspects the soldiers. And if he sees a soldier that his shoes were not polished properly, so he gives him a demerit, whatever it's called, right? So imagine you got a soldier who's on the front. And yesterday, during the inspection, his boot had a little stain on it. And the commander said, how come you have that? And he punished him. The soldier is now on the front. He says, I'm not a good soldier. Because yesterday, after all, the commander told me that I did something wrong. My shoe was not good. So I cannot be a good soldier. If he thinks that on the front, what's going to happen to him? Not only him, the people around him are going to get affected negatively. It's not your job to think whether you're a good soldier or not. The commander put you there. He believes in you. What happened yesterday on your boot. It's nothing to do with it. Today, go shoot and win the war. You have to have simcha, you have to have joy, you have to have excitement. And with your joy and excitement, you'll win the war. But if you think I'm not good enough, you're not going to get anywhere. So this is the thing. So every Jew, we all think, you know what? I got to tell you a secret. When I say none of us are perfect, I include myself. It's a little secret. Don't tell anybody. None of us is perfect. And not only none of us is perfect, the Eibishter created us imperfect. Hashem knows we're imperfect. Hashem created us imperfect. He gave us a Yetzer Hara. He made us this way. So here I am today. I have to make a decision. I have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. This mitzvah is a little bit beyond what I usually do, maybe. Maybe I'm going to spend a few more minutes davening with a little more intention. We're leading up to Shevat, such a holy day. Tomorrow morning when I daven, I'm going to take a couple more minutes. I usually don't say Tehillim after davening. Maybe tomorrow morning, because the Frierdiker Rebbe said we should all say Tehillim, I'll say at least one of the chapters of Tehillim. Stop. But who am I? I'm not that religious. I'm not that Hasidic. I'm not that this. I'm not that the other. Forget about that. Right now, we have the ability right now to bring the essence of Hashem into the world, to fulfill the entire purpose of creation. This is what we have to do today. Now, this mitzvah, this opportunity. Why would I give up this opportunity to change the world? To change the world. Not only that, we should wake up in the morning with tremendous simcha, tremendous joy. What happened yesterday. What's happening tomorrow, I don't know. Right now, I have the opportunity to fulfill the entire purpose of creation. That's what I'm here for. That's what I can do. I can do it. It should fill us with tremendous simcha and joy, and we should move forward and do the right thing. And that's what every one of us can do. And this is what the Rebbe told us again and again and again. People would come to the Rebbe, and people would say to the Rebbe, they would have their problems, they have this, they have that. I know someone who told me that he went to the Rebbe, and he had done some things which he was a Hasidic man, but he'd done some things which he was really embarrassed of, and really, really felt like he wasn't good enough. That's what he felt. So he went to the Rebbe, and he told the Rebbe, and he was expecting the Rebbe to give him a hard time about it. And the Rebbe said, this is what he told me, the Rebbe said, I wish you Hatzlacha Rabba in the war against the Yetzer Hara. I wish you tremendous success in the war against the Yetzer Hara. He said it transformed his life. Instead of thinking about all the things he did wrong, he thought about, the Rebbe gave me a bracha for success in the war against the Yetzer Hara. When we shluchim come out to places all over the world, did you hear the story about Wuhan? Did everyone hear the story about Wuhan?
The virus.
The virus in Wuhan, right?
Kosher food, right?
So there was this woman from Palo Alto. This woman, I tell you, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, who would ever dream of such a thing? A woman, a Gyaris from Palo Alto, who comes from Wuhan, whose parents live there. She lives in Palo Alto. She went there with her daughter for the first time. Her daughter had a spring break from yeshiva in Chicago. She took her to China to visit her parents, and her mother wasn't feeling well.
For their New Year.
For their New Year, and for whatever, but for her break, winter break. And she went there for the first time to take her daughter to China. So she brought with her enough food for a couple of weeks. Then she's there, and all of a sudden this thing is happening. And I called her up, and she's terrified, she's crying. I told her, listen, you have to have faith in Hashem. I said, it's very easy for me. I'm sitting in Palo Alto telling you there, but you have to have faith in Hashem. Certainly you have a shlichus there. I don't know what it is, but anyway, and then I hung up the phone and called the shliach, Rabbi Freundlich, in Beijing. But that's not the whole story. I sent out a WhatsApp to the Shluchim in California. I'm on a WhatsApp group. Does anybody know the phone number of the Shliach in Beijing, in China? So someone sent me the phone number of the office of Chabad. I sent back, I already called the office. I got the office of Chabad.org. I need his cell phone. 3 minutes later, someone sent me his cell phone. I called him on his cell phone. I told him the story. 1 hour later, she was on the list to get out on the plane that took 230 people, diplomats, and they had a couple of seats for 1,000 American citizens. She got on the plane. They got on the plane. Within an hour later, she was on the plane because one of his congregants, one of the people that davens in his shul, works in the embassy and got her onto the plane. Think about the Rebbe's reach. But how does a guy go to Beijing? How does a guy come to San Francisco, to Palo Alto? I have a daughter in the big island of Hawaii. Now, let me tell you, Hawaii is a beautiful place to visit. It's a great place to visit. But you know what? If we decide we want to go out, eat out in a kosher restaurant, and we've already eaten here 5 times in the kosher restaurants here, and we want to go eat some Chinese food in a kosher restaurant, 5 hours drive away, we got some kosher restaurants. We got lots of them. Right? We want meat, which we can't get here, or other products. We have a truck that comes up here from LA and brings us food. On the big island, 5 hours away, you're deep, deep down under the ocean. You're not anywhere else. You know, how is it possible that young couples go out into a place where there's no support, where they have to be the support for everybody? How could such a thing happen? And the answer is because of the inspiration of the Rebbe. There is a very interesting halacha. If somebody becomes ritually impure, today we are all tamei, right? We don't have tum and tara, we don't really have, except woman goes to the mikveh, but otherwise we don't really use the mikveh in the way we used to. But it used to be, if someone wanted to go into the Beis HaMikdash, or to eat the holy foods, a korban, or a kohen to eat truma, they had to be tahar, pure. And if a person became tamei, they would go to the mikveh. A mikveh has to have 40 saw. 40 saw is a certain measurement. You want to know how many gallons? It's 190 gallons. I know that because our mikveh, the mikveh has to be double that, so we have 390 gallons. It's supposed to be 380. We put an extra 390 gallons. So for the bar, for underneath where the rainwater is. So it has to be, a mikveh has to have a certain measurement, at least 40 saw. However, there's a different type of mikveh that you can dip in, and that is a spring. If you have a spring, so there are 2 things about the spring that is different than a mikveh. A mikveh has to be, the water has to be contained. If the water is flowing out, it's not a kosher mikveh. And it has to have 40 saw. So if you have a tiny needle, it needs to be dipped. In the old days when they had needles with tamei, they had to make them tar. You had to dip in the mikveh, it has to have 40 saw. However, if you have a stream that comes from a fresh spring, it's a tiny bit of water is good enough. If you have a needle and it has a little flow of water, you put the needle in the water, even though the water is flowing, and even though it's a tiny bit of water, the needle becomes tar. How does that work? Why is it different from a mikveh? The difference is because it's connected to its source. When it's connected to its source, the source is much bigger. The source is under the ground. There's fresh water, lots of water under the source. When it's connected onto the source, then it's called mayim chayim. It's called living water, because when it's connected to its source, it's alive. There's many halachas with plants. A plant is considered alive, a living plant. There's a question if a plant is in a planter. So if the planter doesn't have any hole in it, then the planter is not connected to the ground. But if it has a hole big enough for one little root to come out, then it's considered connected to the ground. There's many halachas, because when it's connected to its source, it's alive. The Rebbe is the source of life. The Rebbe is the source of Torah and Yiddishkeit and life. I want to talk a little bit soon in Mitzvah. We have an opportunity, a little bit about who are we to know what a Rebbe is, but maybe a little bit of insight that we can understand what a Rebbe is. But when you're connected to the source of life, then a tiny person, a couple, themselves, with no other connection, with no support, with no kosher food, with nothing, are able to transform a place because the source of life makes everything pure, spreads the light. And this is the secret of Chabad. People want to know, what's the secret of Chabad? What's the secret of the Shluchim? How is it possible that we've transformed in the past 50 years the world? From 70 years ago, after the Holocaust, people were writing articles all over the world. People were writing major articles that Judaism in America is finished in 25 years, 30 years. There's not going to be any Jews in America anymore because of assimilation, 50 years. And look at what's happening in the flourishing of Yiddishkeit all over the world. It's amazing. How does it happen? It happens because we're connected to the Rebbe. And every single person here, every one of us in this room, the fact that you're here, if you hear the Rebbe's teachings, if you connect to the Rebbe's teachings, if you're in a Chabad house, and especially if you learn the Rebbe's Sichos, learn the Rebbe's Maimer, learn what the Rebbe's taught, and take that and do something that the Rebbe taught, take upon ourselves something that the Rebbe taught to do it, Avos Yisrael, to do another mitzvah, the 10 Mivtzoyim, to nail a pushka to the wall, etc., etc., all the things the Rebbe taught us, this connects us to the source of life. And once we're connected to the source of life, there's no such thing as I'm not good enough. There's no such thing as I'm humble. What do you mean I'm humble? You can be humble all you know what humility is? Moshe Rabbeinu taught us what humility is. Humility means it's not me. It's not me, it's the Rebbe. It's the Eibishter gives us the brachas. The Rebbe gives us the brachas. The Eibishter gives us life. The Rebbe gives us blessing. And this way we're able to transform everything. It's not me. But because I'm connected to the Rebbe, because I'm connected to Hashem, two separate things, by the way. I don't want to be caught in my words, right? Because I'm connected to the Rebbe's teachings, and the Rebbe connects us to Hashem, therefore, there's nothing that we can't do. So the greatest strength, we have the greatest power. It's not my power, it's the power of the Eibishter, the power of the Rebbe. And therefore everyone can do tremendous things. L'chaim, l'chaim. So, because the Maimon tells us not to be humble, I'm not going to say who am I to say what is a Rebbe, although I do believe that. But so there are many things.
Don't be stupid.
There are many levels on which we can understand what is a Rebbe. I mean, we're talking about 70 years of the Rebbe's leadership. We should probably talk a little bit about. So, I was fortunate to spend 5 years. You grew up in New York, so you have many more years. But I was fortunate to spend 5 years by the Rebbe, and many Farbrengens and many davenings. Saw the Rebbe. I was had the zchus to follow the Rebbe a few times from home or to home. The Bachrim would go always with the Rebbe. I'll just tell you a quick. This is an aside. It's not well. I haven't seen the story published anywhere, but I know that. One of my friends, when they came back from walking the Rebbe, Shabbos morning, they were walking the Rebbe from home, and they were walking across, so if you know the area, so the Rebbe lived on President Street. They came from President Street to Brooklyn Avenue. They would walk across Brooklyn Avenue, and then at some point across the street, Brooklyn Avenue, and go to Eastern Parkway. And they said that the Rebbe was walking, and a pack of dogs started chasing the Rebbe. There was one dog that was in the lead, and that was barking at the Rebbe, really barking at the Rebbe very loud, and the other dogs were following. The Rebbe kept on walking as if nothing was happening, and then the Rebbe crossed across Brooklyn Avenue, and he walked. There were no cars. He walked across, and the dogs followed the Rebbe, and this dog was barking, and suddenly a car out of nowhere came and right over the dog and killed the dog.
Really? Oh boy.
I heard this from, I think it was a Vremel Grossbaum. Never heard it, huh?
No.
You heard it? Anyway, the dog must have been a Gilgal of somebody.
Yeah.
They tell...
I heard it barking, just one.
There was...
Anyway, the Rebbe did it to save the Bachrim. Actually, the dogs came because of the Bachrim.
So yeah, probably. They tell a story that there was I don't know if it's a true story. I've heard it's a true story. That there was a couple of kids playing in the schoolyard. One of them was a chassid, and one of them was not. And his parents were actually among those who count themselves among those who oppose Chassidus. So the non-Chassidic kid said to the Chassidic kid at one point, he said to him, "My father hates your Rebbe." So the Chassidic boy, the Lubavitcher boy, said to the other one, "And my Rebbe loves your father." In a way, that encapsulates it, right? They tell a story. You know, the truth is that miracles in Lubavitch, I mean, we tell many, many stories of miracles of the Rebbe. In Lubavitch, until this generation, now that we have to explain to people who the Rebbe is, we talk about the Rebbe's miracles, but the truth is, they say by the Alter Rebbe there were miracles lying around on the floor and nobody bothered to pick them up. Because the true greatness of a tzaddik is not that he can do a miracle. For a tzaddik to do a miracle, it's not a big deal. They tell about the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek used to help women, used to give brachas and help women who were alone, whose husbands had left without giving them a get and were lost, to find their husbands. This is a big problem. It's a problem today, but in those days it was a bigger problem because someone in those days, if you left, you were gone. Today, there's hardly a place in the world you can hide without someone finding you. It's possible, but very, very hard. In those days, people would go, and that was it. They were gone. So there were agunas. It's called an aguna, a woman whose husband is gone. And people would come to the Rebbe and ask him for brachas to help them find their husbands. So there was this woman who was an aguna, and she had a kid who was like, 7, 8 years old. A little kid, whatever. And she came to the Tzemach Tzedek to ask him for a bracha to help find her husband. And she hadn't had an opportunity to ask him yet. And it was by a Farbrengen, and there was a visiting Rebbe. Another Rebbe had come to visit the Tzemach Tzedek. I don't remember who it was. And the Tzemach Tzedek had a Farbrengen. They're sitting. The Tzemach Tzedek is the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. So they were sitting next to each other. The other Rebbe was sitting next to the Tzemach Tzedek, and they was having a Farbrengen. And in the middle of the Farbrengen, someone came running and said that his wife was about to give birth. And she was having difficulty in childbirth, and it didn't look good, and the doctor said that she may not make it. So they needed to ask the Rebbe for a bracha. Nobody wanted to interrupt the Tzemach Tzedek in the middle of the Farbrengen. So what did they do? This kid was running around, so the mother wrote a note with the name and the mother's name of the woman who was having trouble, and asking for a bracha, and asked the kid. Now the kid couldn't speak. The kid was not able to speak. He was mute all his life, couldn't speak. So she sent a note to the Tzemach Tzedek, go under the table, give this to the Tzemach Tzedek. So the kid comes to the Tzemach Tzedek and hands the Tzemach Tzedek the note which says that this and this woman is in danger of her life in childbirth and she's asking for a bracha. So Tzemach Tzedek said, go tell your mother that not to worry, he'll be okay. She'll be okay. So the kid went and told his mother not to worry, the kid will be okay. So the place was turning over. You can imagine a miracle right in front of everybody. So the other Rebbe said to the Tzemach Tzedek, how can you do such a miracle in public like that? You're not supposed to do miracles in public. So said, I didn't know the kid couldn't speak. There's a story they tell about a chassid. His name was Gurari. This is a couple of generations ago. And he was sitting among a lot of Polish chassidim. You know what? I'm going to digress. There were some chassidim sitting and talking about, this is a joke now. There were some chassidim sitting and talking about the miracles the Rebbe did. So one chassid says, my Rebbe, it was close to Shabbos, and he had to get home, and it was pouring rain, a terrible, big, huge rainstorm. And he was with a horse in the wagon, and the horses were having a hard time. So he said, rain on the right and rain on the left. And he went right through the middle, and it was dry, and he got home in time for Shabbos. And the other chassid said, that's nothing. My Rebbe was going, and it was 3 feet of snow, and the horses were having a hard time to go, and it was almost Shabbos. He said, snow on the right, snow on the left, and he went through on dry land. And all the chassidim are telling us miracles. There was an American Jew there. And they said, Nu, tell us a miracle about your Rebbe. He said, my rabbi was driving and it was almost Shabbos. And he said, Shabbos on the right, Shabbos on the left. Anyway. So these chassidim were sitting. I heard that when I was a little kid, actually. These Hasidim was sitting, and I decided not to worry about the fact that it's being recorded. I decided not to worry about that. All right.
There's nothing to it.
Nothing to worry about. Okay. So the Chassidim are sitting and talking about miracles that their Rebbes did. And they were all Polish Chassidim of Polish Rebbes, and they're talking about miracles. And this Lubavitcher Chassid was not saying anything about his Rebbe. They told him, tell us a miracle your Rebbe did. He didn't want to say anything. Your Rebbe must have performed a miracle, something. He's a great tzaddik. He wouldn't say anything. Finally, he said, okay, you're nudging me. I'll tell you a miracle that happened. I once came to the Rebbe, and I was having a very hard time, financial problem with my business, whatever it was. So I asked the Rebbe for a bracha, what should I do? So the Rebbe said, how much money do you have in your pocket? He said, I have 1 ruble. The Rebbe said, go buy a lottery ticket. So I took my last ruble out of my pocket, and I bought a lottery ticket, and I didn't win the lottery. So they said, what's the miracle? He said, the miracle is that I'm still a chassid. And that is a profound story. Because he understood. So obviously the Rebbe knew that he had to spend his last, right? Because we understand that the Rebbe's miracles that the Rebbe does are like, it's almost like, it says, if we can talk about, it says about the Eibishter, it says the Eibishter's greatness, L'cha Hashem Agdullah. The Eibishter is great. That means the Eibishter is kind, and the Eibishter created all the worlds. Think about how great the Eibishter is. So the Gemara says, in the place where you find Hashem's greatness, there you find His humility. For to say the Eibishter is great because He created a world is not to talk about Hashem's greatness. For Hashem to create the world is nothing. Hashem spoke words, and the world was created. The whole world is worth nothing compared to Hashem. Great tzaddikim are the same way. For them to do a miracle, of course, like Rabbi Shimon Lazarov says. He has a great Russian accent. Russian Israeli, I don't remember. God in the tzaddikim made a deal. This is what he says. The tzaddikim do what God says, and God says what the tzaddikim say. Big deal, of course. It's tzaddik goes v'kadosh baruch hu mekayim. It's Allah. Of course, if a tzaddik says, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to do it. The greatness of a Rebbe is much more. But nevertheless, I'm going to talk about a miracle that the Rebbe did here in Northern California in 1991. In 1991, we were actually coming out of our 6th year of drought. Anybody remember? There was a drought for 6 years. As a matter of fact, I remember that when it started raining, there was an Israeli guy who lived in Palo Alto for 5 years. And we're walking to Shul on Shabbos and it's raining. He says, hey, what's going on? I thought it doesn't rain here. For 6 years he'd lived there, it hardly rained. Anyway, so we had 6 years of drought. And every year it was getting worse and worse. And every year I thought to myself, maybe we should ask the Rebbe for a bracha for rain. But then I thought to myself, I was humble. Who am I? The Rebbe knows what's going on in the world. Who am I to ask for a bracha? A global thing like this, didn't seem right. And then in 1991, it was February, and the drought was continuing, and it hadn't rained. And I heard on the news one day. In those days, you couldn't hear the Torah on the. There was no. So I was listening to the news, and they said that in Marin County they're going to cut water use down by 50%. Now that's serious. For an American to take a shower once every second day, that's pikuach nefesh. So that couldn't happen. So I decided to call. So I called Rabbi Groner. Now understand that this was like the last week in February. And it was a week before Purim. Purim was on these dates are important. March 1st was Purim. Happens to be my Goyish birthday, March 1st. And this is a week before Purim. Purim was on Thursday. This is like the Wednesday or Thursday before Purim. And I called Rabbi Gron. I said, I don't know if this is right or wrong. Maybe we should ask the Rebbe for a bracha. This is really bad. So he says, you know what? If you can get all the shluchim in Northern California to sign a letter to the Rebbe, I'll bring it into the Rebbe. So I called Rabbi Hecht. And there were 7 of us in the Bay Area at the time. Kanai Nahara today in Northern California, there are 60. In those days, there was 7 shluchim in the Bay Area, Northern California. I called everybody, and everybody agreed. And I wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and I said that in the name of all the shluchim of Northern California, we're asking for a bracha for rain. This is the story of the drought. Send it to the Rebbe. On Sunday, Rabbi Grona said the Rebbe gave a bracha. The Rebbe gave an answer. What happened is the Rebbe used to give out at certain times of year, he would write a common bracha for anybody who asked for a bracha. He would tell Rabbi Grona, give them this bracha, and sometimes he would personalize it, but he gave us this bracha, and this bracha talked about the fact it's close to Purim, and the Jewish people time of joy, and he gave us this bracha. This was Sunday, so we started telling people it's going to rain, it's going to rain. The Rebbe said it's going to rain. On Wednesday was Tanis Esther, the fast of Esther, the last day of February. And the Rebbe was speaking there every fast day in the afternoon. After Mincha, the Rebbe would speak, called Divrei Kavushin. Words of encouragement on a fast day. A fast day is a day when we're supposed to turn to Hashem and do tshuva. The Rebbe would speak words of encouragement. So, you want to fix this? So anyway. So the Rebbe was speaking, and I'm listening by phone. I was listening to the Rebbe speaking. And in the middle of the Sikha, it seemed to have nothing to do with the Sikha. The Rebbe started to know about rain. And in the Zohar talks about the word Geshem, which means rain, and the gematria of Geshem. And by the way, I can prove it to you, because you don't have to take my word for it. And I tell this now, when I tell the story to Bachrim and others, they can't believe it. If you open up the book of Toras Menachem, which has the transcripts of the Sichas, of the Rebbe Sichas, you open up to 1991, Tafshin and Aleph, the Sicha of Tanis Esther. In parentheses, they have a little section there that talks about rain according to the Zohar and the gematria of the word Geshem. It's in parentheses because it has nothing to do with the Sikha. Nothing. And at the time, the Rebbe said, right now it's hidden, but it's going to be revealed very soon. And the next day, March 1st, it started raining. Wow. And later on, and the entire press and the newspapers and everyone referred to it as the March Miracle. Remember the March Miracle? It rained the entire month of March, and all the reservoirs were filled, and that was the end of the drought. And there's an article in the San Francisco Chronicle years later, and what they wrote there is it was another drought, and they wrote, what we need is something that happened in 1991, a phenomenon known as the March Miracle, we had a biblical miracle when it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. This was the miracle that the Rebbe brought about. This mamash happened here. So this is one thing. When the Rebbe, and there were many, many miracles, there are thousands of miracles the Rebbe can tell you. I'll tell you a miracle on a different level. A miracle on a different level. A miracle of the Rebbe's Avos Yisrael, the Rebbe's love for every Jew. I'll tell you two stories. One of them I read, and one of them I participated in on some level. The first one I read, there was a book that was written right after the Rebbe passed away. And this is a book that in the foreword of the book, it's Miracles of the Rebbe, and they write that every story in this book was checked. First-person stories was checked with the people it happened to, and the person who writes it is someone who is extremely reliable, because there are all kinds of stories. I have a book about the Baal Shem Tov stories, and the title is New Stories About the Baal Shem Tov. How do you have new stories about the Baal Shem Tov? So the stories about the Rebbe, but these stories, every one of them was clarified, was authenticated. Yeah. So this story goes like this. There was a young woman, a young girl, a teenage girl, who was not religious at all. His family was not religious. And she had a friend who told her she should go to the Rebbe. I don't remember the circumstances of why she went to the Rebbe. She should go to the Rebbe. The Rebbe gives out dollars. She should go to the Rebbe, get $1 and a bracha. So she went to the Rebbe, and she was not dressed in the way, she was dressed very not sneezdik. Now usually when they went through the line, there was a long line, and if any of you went, there was a long line through 770, and you'd eventually come, there was one line for the men, one line for the women, and when the women would go through, if they weren't not dressed snizdik, they would give them a robe to put, a shawl to put on, something to cover themselves. She somehow went the other way, and somehow passed through the line, and went to the front of the line, and she came to the Rebbe, she wasn't dressed snizdik. So the Rebbe gave her $1. And the Rebbe said to her, if you come back to me dressed the way a Jewish girl is supposed to be dressed, I'll give you $2. So she lived in New Jersey. She came home to New Jersey. This story was told to somebody at Hakafas, on Simchas Torah, at Hakafas in 770, by a stranger. And this stranger is telling a chassid this story. The story was written by the chassid to whom the story was told. And this stranger is telling the story. So this girl goes home to New Jersey, and she tells her father, I want to go shopping, I need some money to go shopping. He says, why do you need to go shopping? She was hesitant to tell, so finally she told him. He says, why? I want to go buy some clothes. What do you need clothes? You have plenty of clothes. She said, I want to buy a skirt and a dress. She says, why do you need a skirt? So she told him, what? You went to the Rebbe, you're now going to buy new clothes. The Rebbe, are you crazy? We're not religious. Blah, blah, blah. No way, I'm not giving you money for clothes. She was very upset, but she couldn't do it. A week went by, she nudges the father again, and she nudged the father for a long time until the father saw that she was mamish getting sick. She was so upset because she wanted to go back to the Rebbe. She was impressed by the Rebbe, she wanted to go back. She was mamish getting sick. So the father said to her, you know what? In 6 months from now, if you still want to go, I'll give you money to buy clothes, and you can go 6 months from now. 6 months passed. She came back to the father. She was waiting with the 6 months. Came back to the father, said, you promised? He said, the Rebbe's not even going to remember you. 6 months later, thousands and thousands of people have gone. He met you once. He doesn't even know you. Go ahead and buy the clothes, but the Rebbe's not going to... She said, I'm sure the Rebbe will remember me. He says, yeah, if the Rebbe remembers you, then I'll go too. Anyway, so she bought clothes, and she came to the Rebbe, and she went with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe gave her $1 and a bracha. And she walked away, and she was very disappointed. And the Rebbe called her back. And he said, I thought you would remind me. If you don't remind me, I have to remind you. Here's $2. And this is the story. This is one. And the other story happened when I brought a group of people to Palo Alto. And actually, there's a few stories that happened, a few miracle stories that happened, and I'm going to tell you a couple of them. This is not the main story I was going to tell you. But there was a young woman, actually a Guerreras from Argentina, who came with us. She was religious and everything. And she came and she asked the Rebbe for brachas for a few things, including for a shidduch. And the Rebbe gave her a bracha for refuah.
What do you mean you took people in? What was
Okay,
it?
let me tell you.
You went from Palo Alto.
No, I know that, but
I'll explain.
Yeah.
Every Sunday, the Rebbe used to stand for many, many hours, 6-7 hours, and people would come to him from all over the world, Jewish, non-Jewish, religious, non-religious, men, women, children, and every person who came. You know that typically if you go to a great leader, any leader, they're going to ask you for a donation, they're going to ask you for your name and number to put down on the mailing list, etc., etc. People came to the Rebbe asked nobody for anything. The Rebbe gave everybody who came $1 because he said when two Jews meet, it should benefit a third. And he would give people $1, sometimes 2 and 3, and give everyone a bracha. People would ask the Rebbe for questions, life-altering questions, and in a split second the Rebbe would answer and change people's lives. I want to tell you, I had that experience a couple of times. And I would go to the Rebbe. Now, just imagine this. You're standing here, thousands of people coming by, one after the other, right? How much time can you spend with each person? But when you stood in front of the Rebbe locked his eyes on yours, and you knew that at that second, there was nothing and nobody in the world to the Rebbe but you. The Rebbe was with you 1,000%. It was an amazing, the whole time stopped. The whole world stopped. Everything stopped. You were there with the Rebbe. It was amazing. And people's lives changed just by that moment. And the Rebbe, would give people blessings and give people advice. And so just as this is a by the way. So this woman, the Rebbe gave I got my $1. And then I stood and I introduced every person as I went ahead, of the group, and every person went by, I introduced them.
So you brought them in special
So I brought them in a
dollars.
group. We went for a Shabbaton, especially to get dollars for the Rebbe, but Tzach made a Shabbaton, so we came for the Shabbaton, and then on Sunday we all went to the Rebbe. So the Shabbaton, they were all prepared for what it meant. So anyway, so this woman goes by, and I introduced her to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe gave her a bracha for health, for good health and refuah. She was not sick. Nothing wrong with her. 6 months later, I got a call from the hospital. She's in critical condition. She had a brain infection. Her father had been called to come from Argentina because she was going to die. There's nothing they can do. And 2 weeks later, she got up and walked out of the hospital.
Well,
And I have a video of that, how the Rebbe told her she should have refuah, and she didn't ask for refuah. There was nothing wrong with her at the time. Anyway. So we're going. What happened is now I see the videos. I see there are people who came in through the other side. I didn't know I could do that. So instead we went through the line. So they had benches set up in 770, and you would go at the beginning of the line and walk through the line. Take about 3 hours to get to the line. So you're walking for 3 hours, you're talking, you're schmoozing, you're saying some Tehillim, you're learning some Torah, preparing yourself to come to the Rebbe, and then you would walk, if you've been to 770, from downstairs to upstairs, there's a narrow stairway. You walk up the stairway, and as you get to the top of the stairway, there are some Bachrim there, Yeshiva Bachrim, and they tell you, get ready, you're going to be by the Rebbe in 15 seconds. Be ready, because people, there's so much time. You have to get yourself into the mode. You're going to be in front of the Rebbe in a second. And it comes quickly. You walk through the hallway and you're there. So you have to be ready. So he said, get ready. You're going to be there in 15 seconds. And all of a sudden, the line stops. Excuse me, we have to wait a few minutes. So we waited a few minutes and they said, okay, you're going. And we went and the whole group from Palo Alto went. I'll tell you soon another story that happened then. So what happened? Why we were delayed? Miss Israel, the beauty queen of Israel, was coming to Washington for the beauty pageant in Washington, Miss World, Miss Universe, I don't know what it's called. And she, like many celebrities from Israel, was told, you go to America, among the tours there, you have to go see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So she came, Miss Israel, came to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe to ask him for a bracha. Now let me ask you, think of any other Jewish leader you can think of today in the world, famous Jewish leaders, people who are on the internet, whatever, people famous. Think, what would they do in such a situation? What would they say to her?
We're talking about religious leaders.
Religious leaders. I'm talking about, great religious leaders. What would they say to this woman who has come to yes, I'm sorry.
I'm not the person who would ask for it.
Sorry, religious, others would ask, yes. Yes, ask her for your right. Just think about it. Who is she? Why did she come to America? And she's coming to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, this holy tzaddik, to ask for a bracha. The Rebbe smiled at her, and with the love of a father to a daughter, he said, King Solomon said, Sheker hachein, v'hevel hayofi, Isha yirat Hashem hitit halal, false is beauty, the woman who is God-fearing, she is to be praised. And he gave her $1, said, tell it to all your friends, and he gave her $1 for tzedakah. That's what the Rebbe said to her. With such love, with such avas Yisrael. Talk about miraculous. Talk about a Rebbe. Talk about a person who cares about every single Yid. And this is the love that the Rebbe showed for every single person. People came to him with the most difficult challenges, spiritual challenges. And the Rebbe brought out the best in everybody. There's a beautiful sikha on Baha'al Loischa. Baha'al Loischa, you know the sikha about Baha'al Loischa on Rashi. There's a Rashi on Baha'al Loischa. When Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron to light the menorah, Aaron's job in the Beis Hamikdash, among other things, was to light the menorah. The menorah had 7 lights. This one has 9, but 7 lights. The middle branch and 3 branches coming from each side. And he says, when you light the lights, make sure that all the flames go toward the center. That's what it says. Hashem says. Baha'al Loischa doesn't mean when you light. Baha'al Loischa means when you raise. Bahadlikcha means when you light. So one of the questions, Rashi comments on this question, he doesn't say the question, but Rashi comments, why does it say when you lift up the lights, when you raise the lights, it should say when you light the lights. So Rashi says when you raise the lights means Shetahei shal heves oila me'eleha, that the flame should rise on its own. Which means, literally means, hold the flame there until not the light is sputtering, till the light is burning on its own. So the Rebbe said a fascinating thing on this. The Rebbe said, Aaron is the one who showed love to every Jew and brought every Jew to Hashem. Right? He was Mekar of every Jew. It says, Oyev es abriyos, Aaron loved the creations and brought them to Torah. In Tanya, he asked the question, why do you refer to Jewish people as creations? Briyos. Briyos means creatures. Aaron loved creatures and he brought them to Torah. What do you mean love creatures? They have nothing better to say about them than they're creatures? Animals are creatures. Right? Bugs are creatures. Say Jewish people. Say people. So Tanya says, even those Jews who had nothing good about them other than they were created by Hashem, nothing else good to say about them, Aaron loved them and brought them to the Torah. Every single Jew Aaron brought to the Torah. And this is the job of lighting the menorah. To light all seven represents, the seven branches represent seven different midas, seven different approaches to service of Hashem. And bringing them all together, Aaron was bringing them all to the center to close to Hashem. So what does Rashi say? When you light a neshama, this is what the idea is, to touch the flame to a neshama, right? When you light the neshama, you're not creating the neshama. The flame goes up on its own. When we meet a Jew, and we think to ourselves, and this is the Rebbe's job, the Rebbe gave every one of us to go out and to impact other Jews. And hopefully everyone here will take upon yourself to affect. We're asking this Yud Shvat, that everybody should take upon themselves to affect seven, in honor of the 77 other Jews, put on tefillin with people, affect them somehow, at least one, to go out and affect a Jew. You don't have to make them religious. That's not the job. The job is touch the flame to them so that their flame goes up by themselves, because every Jew has a neshama, and that's what the Rebbe did. The Rebbe would look into someone's eyes, and the flame would come up. That's one of the reasons we call it Yechidus. Yechidus means being alone with the Rebbe. The word Yachid, Yechida, is the essence of the neshama, is Yechida. The Rebbe, who is the Yechida of the generation, would touch the Yechida of a person's soul, and the Yechida, when the essence of the soul is revealed, everything becomes alive. And the person would come to life, it would change a person's life. So this is what happened. This is what happened at that time. So I want to tell you another interesting story. This is an interesting story, not so much as a miracle, but I think it's a miracle. So first of all, I want to begin with telling the story with a preface. There's a story about the Baal Shem Tov. There was a Yid who came to the Baal Shem Tov. He was not a Chassid, but his friends were Chassidim, and encouraged him. He was a wealthy man, and he had a wonderful family, had everything going for him. And he came to the Baal Shem Tov, and he spent Yom Tov by the Baal Shem Tov, or Shabbos, whatever. When he was leaving, he went to say goodbye to the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov said, "Can I give you a bracha? Do you need anything? Maybe I can give you a bracha for something." He says, "Rebbe, no thank you, I have everything I need."
Wrong answer.
Wrong answer. So the Baal Shem Tov said to him, by the way, I'm going to digress. There's a story that's told about, this was told by his son. Reb Zalman Gurari used to be a very wealthy chassid, and he was very close to the Rebbe. And he was very close to the Rebbe, and he did many favors for the Rebbe. And once, the Rebbe needed something to speak to someone in Italy. There was someone in Italy that the Rebbe needed a favor done there, and he had connections in Italy, and the Rebbe asked him somehow to help, and he helped the Rebbe with his connection in Italy and accomplished what the Rebbe wanted. So afterwards, the Rebbe invited him to come to Yechidus, and the Rebbe told him, "You did me a big favor, ask me for a bracha." At that moment, he had a container ship that was stuck outside of the port. It couldn't get in somehow. I don't remember what was going on, the problem. A huge container ship was with millions of dollars were depending on this ship coming in, and he was losing money every day. So he asked the Rebbe for a bracha that this container ship should be able to come into shore and it should work out. The Rebbe looked at him, and the Rebbe did him a favor. The Rebbe said to him, "I give you the opportunity to ask for any bracha, and you ask for that?" So he wasn't stupid. He said, "So what should I ask for?" So the Rebbe said, you should have chasidish and nachas from your children.
Wow.
So he asked, the Rebbe should give him a bracha, he should have chasidish and nachas from his children, and the Rebbe gave that bracha, and his son, the mashpia, told this story on the video.
Wow.
Anyway, so this...
Sound of Buffalo?
Yeah, but no, Montreal. Buffalo or Montreal? I think Montreal. I think Itchemeyer. Itchemeyer is in Montreal, no?
Itchemeyer is in Montreal.
Itchemeyer is in Montreal. Itchemeyer told the story. Anyway, I saw it on a video, the story. So...
What happened to the merchandise?
So
I'm the nudnik, you know.
Can't catch the mouse. What kind of soup was it? Yeah. Anyway, so the story goes that this non-chassid, the Baal Shem Tov said, "Would you like to ask for bracha?" He said, "No, thank you, I have everything I need." So the Baal Shem Tov said, "Maybe you'll do me a favor." He said, "You're going back to Vilna." I think it was Vilna. I don't remember which city. Going back to your city. No, it wasn't Vilna. Brody. Going back to Brody. Maybe you can take a letter for me to someone there and deliver a letter for me. They're okay. So the Baal Shem Tov wrote a note, put an envelope, addressed it to whoever. The guy put it in his pocket, and he promised the Baal Shem Tov he'd deliver the letter. And he totally forgot about the letter. 25 years went by. The Baal Shem Tov had passed away already many years before. And this Gevir lost everything. He lost all his parnasa, and he became a pauper. To the extent that he was selling his old clothes. And he was going through his clothes, a box of clothes to sell, and he was going through the pockets, and in the pocket of a jacket he took out a letter from the Baal Shem Tov that he forgot to deliver 25 years ago. Maybe this is why I lost all my money, he thought to himself. He looks at it, it's addressed to Reb Tzadok, right? Reb Tzadok, the Parnas, the president of the community. So he goes, he figures by this time Reb Tzadok is an old man, comes to the community center, and he asks for Reb Tzadok. Reb Tzadok is a young man with a black beard. He looks at me, doesn't know what to say. I don't know what to tell you, but I have a letter for you from the Baal Shem Tov. Letter from me from the Baal Shem Tov. I don't know if he was born or he was a baby. He looks at the letter, says, Reb Tzadok, the Parnas here. He opens it up, and he reads the letter. And the letter says, from the Baal Shem Tov, the man who is standing in front of you used to be a very wealthy man, and now he's lost all his money. I'm asking you to please help him get back on his feet. And to prove to you that this is really a letter from me, from the Baal Shem Tov, your wife just gave birth to a baby boy. And the door opens up and the people come in, Mazel Tov, your wife just gave birth to a baby boy. As he's saying this. This is the story. And I remember as a little kid hearing this story. So one of the guys, and I can tell the name because it's on video and he doesn't mind if I tell the name. One of the guys who came with me was the chairman of my board at the time, Ira Machevsky. He now lives in Eretz Yisrael. And he moved from Eretz Yisrael, from Palo Alto. He used to live in Palo Alto. He's chairman of my board. And then he lived at that time in Palo Alto. And then a few years later he moved to New Jersey. And he lived in New Jersey for 10 years and then he went to Eretz Yisrael. So remember, I brought this group to the Rebbe. So I introduced them all. So I introduced Aaron Machevsky. So he leans in and he says to the Rebbe, he says like this, Rebbe, he says, Rebbe, I was offered another job. Should I take another job? I have a job, I'm offered another job. Should I take the new job offer? So what the Rebbe said shocked me to my... The Rebbe said, you will ask your rabbi and he'll advise you what you should do. Now, I was stupid. I got to tell you, as Chatoyan and Masker, I was very stupid. I should have written to the Rebbe and asked him what to say. But at the time, it didn't occur to me because the Rebbe had told us, don't write me letters, figure it out. That's what the Rebbe told us. Figure it out. So I sat down with him and I said, you know something? There's a saying that says, if the Rebbe says it, then even a broom can shoot. There's that saying. The Rebbe hates can bezim shissen. So I said, I'm a broom. What do I know? But the Rebbe told you to ask me, so, I didn't want to be false, right? Misplaced humility. So I asked him all about the job. What do you think about it? Do you think it's a better job, better opportunity? He said, yes, everything sounded great. I said, it sounds great. I think you should take the job. And he took the job. Fine. 10 years later, he's in New Jersey. This was already after Gimel Tammuz. And I'm sitting in my office. I got a call from Ira Machevsky. He says, Rabbi, nobody will answer this question to me. I have a very important question, and I need an answer, and I know you'll give me an answer. I need an answer. He says, I have a new business I want to open. It's selling seed for tropical birds. Tropical bird seed. It's a franchise. And it's a great business, and it's a big thing now. The only thing is, it's going to be in a mall. And the rules of the mall is that the store has to be open 364 days a year. It means it has to be open on Shabbos. And I happen to know that there are places, businesses, where they have a non-Jewish, they sell it on Shabbos to a non-Jew. So I want to set up a thing to sell my business on Shabbos to a non-Jew. I should be able to open so for Shabbos it belongs to a non-Jew. And I've asked my rabbi here in New Jersey, and I've asked many rabbis, and nobody wants to help me with it. Nobody wants to do it. And I'm calling you to ask me to help me. How do I do this? And I had a flashback. And I saw myself standing in front of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe saying, you will ask your rabbi and he will advise you what you should do. I said, do you remember 10 years ago we were by the Rebbe and the Rebbe told you that? He said, yes. I said, that's not what the Rebbe was talking about. What do I know about business? This is what the Rebbe was talking about. This is my business. I said, a Yid has to go to sleep on Friday night, has to go into Shabbos without any worries about business. Don't do it. And he said, okay. And a month later, I wrote him a beautiful letter, and I said, I'm so impressed with you that you decided not to do it. And he called me 3 days later. It took 3 days in those days for the letter to get there. Thank you for sending the letter. I was about to change my mind. Encourage me.
That's good. That's the story.
So this is the Rebbe. Someone explained to me, I was talking to someone recently about the Rebbe. The Rebbe, so our neshamas, where do our souls come from? Our neshamas come from Atzilus, right? The world of Atzilus. The world of Atzilus is one with Hashem. The world with Atzilus is before any major, so there's the first Tzimtzum, of course, but any major contractions of Hashem's light, Atzilus is still considered one with Hashem. Then comes Bri, Yetzirah, Asiyah. The worlds of Bri, Yetzirah, Asiyah are separate, so to speak. Right? Our neshamas all come from Atzilus, but they go through many worlds, and they come from this place, from that place. You know, at some point, so the analogy in Chassidus is given that if you have a funnel, you turn a funnel, the water goes straight through the funnel without anything stopping, right? Then you have a colored glass. Let's say this was a green glass, and I look at it, and there's water in the glass. I look at it, and I see that the water is what color? It's green. Has the water changed? The water is still the same clear water, but to me, because I'm looking through this, it's green. Now, take light and put it through a filter. The green light is actually transformed. It's now green light, right? It looks green. And it is green because you filtered out all the other light. It's transformed the light to green. Neshamas that come down to the world, I'm not sure if I'm getting this exactly right, but something like this. So there's some that are like a funnel that come straight from Atzilus all the way down. Others, the funnel kind of stops somewhere along the way, and then it gets enclosed by the other world, and it looks like it comes from Bri Yetzirah Asiyah, and then other light comes and gets changed, but the neshama is always a neshama, it's always the same neshama, but from a great tzaddik, it goes straight through, and in this world it's the same as Atzilus. In Atzilus there's no limitations, there's no time, there's no space, nothing. The truth is our neshama also is not limited by time and space, and that's why when you do a mitzvah, you do a single mitzvah, the mitzvah is eternal. It lasts forever. You have to be careful about that. I'll tell you in a minute why. But anyway, so a tzaddik is in Atzilus. So for a tzaddik to see the past, to see the present, to see the future, to see what's going to happen, when I come to the Rebbe and I ask for a bracha, or I have a problem and I ask the Rebbe what do I see? I see what's happening right now. The Rebbe sees my whole life, my whole neshama. Why am I here? What am I doing here? The Rebbe sees that the struggle was just there, just for me to overcome it. That's why the Rebbe should put the struggle there. So the Rebbe is able to see all of that and inspire me. And if I listen to what the Rebbe says, I'm able to raise myself above all of that. So that's another, the Rebbe lifts us up out of our limitations, out of our little me, my little world, my little tzaras, my little problems. And the Rebbe lifts me up and brings me to a different level. And the reason I say it's dangerous, you have to be careful. There's a place called Point Lobos. Anyone been there? Point Lobos. It's south, not the one here, Monterey, Carmel. Beautiful place. So there, for many, many years, the head, the guy who was in charge, the ranger, was a Jewish guy. Chuck. Ranger Chuck, he was a Jewish guy. And the first time I went there, he introduced himself to me as the brother of a woman, I don't want to say any names, from Northern California, who's a Balas Tshuva, who is a Lubavitcher woman, who became Lubavitch, became Frum, and she and her husband, Baruch Hashem, they have Lubavitcher kids and grandchildren now already, and she used to eat in my in-laws' house in New York when she went to school there. So we were very close. I asked him if he'd like to put on tefillin, and he said no. Whenever I sent, by the way, he let me in for nothing. It cost $10 to get in. He always let me in for nothing. And whenever anyone from here would go, I would say, give my regards to Ranger Chuck, and anyone who gave my regards would go in for nothing. This is how it worked. But I said, but bring tefillin with you and ask him to put on tefillin. And he said no to every single one. This went on for probably 7-8 years. And I would ask him to put on tefillin. I would sometimes drive down there specially, and I would bring groups down there, and he would give us tours, and he would take us around. And we became very close friends. He would give me a hug, Rabbi Levin, so nice to see you. Thanks for bringing the group down. But he never put on tefillin. Anyway, one day, two Bachrim who were working for us for the summer went down there, and they came back, and they said, Chuck said to tell you that it's not time yet, but in September he'll put on tefillin. Why in September? What happened? So by his sister's wedding, she had a Lubavitcher wedding, right? So he put on tefillin, a bacher came and put on tefillin with him. And he told the bacher, I haven't put on tefillin for 12 years. And when the bacher took off the tefillin, he said, this will last you for another 12 years. And in September was the anniversary of the 12 years. So when I tell someone this will last you a lifetime, I don't tell them this will last you a lifetime. This mitzvah will stay with you for a lifetime. You have to be careful how you say it. Anyway, so sing a niggin and now I'll continue. Sing a niggin. When we talk about a Rebbe, even everything we say about the Rebbe doesn't touch on a tiny bit on our understanding what a Rebbe is. We have no concept to even, we have no words, no tools to understand, beginning to understand what a Rebbe is. Sometimes in the middle of a Farbrengen, the Rebbe would take a handkerchief and wipe his ear. And I always thought when the Rebbe was doing it, what is happening in the world of Atzilus that the Rebbe is doing now with his ear? I was sure that movement was a fact. There's sometimes you hear stories, the Rebbe said a word, the Rebbe said something, the story with, this is not the theme that I'm trying to bring up, but the story with, from Israel, Arik Sharon. Right. Arik Sharon came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, he said to the Rebbe, I'm going back today, and the Rebbe said, why didn't you wait till tomorrow? And he said, I have to get back, whatever. And when he went out of Yechidus, he told the Chassidim, you can't go today, you got to go tomorrow. He said, what do you mean? I got to go back. If the Rebbe asked you why you don't go today, why you don't go tomorrow, it means you got to go tomorrow. The Rebbe just asked him, no, you can't go. So he changed his flight, and that was the first El Al flight that was ever hijacked. It was the one he was on, and what's not known is that they were after him. And that's why they hijacked the plane, and because the Rebbe told him not to go, he was not on that plane. A word from the Rebbe, something from the Rebbe. There's a famous story of a chassid who came to the Rebbe. He was going to Eretz Yisrael, I believe. Again, I don't remember all the details. And the Rebbe said, are you going to Brazil? And he said, yeah, I'm going to Brazil. And the Rebbe gave him $1 to give him Brazil. And he went to Brazil, and he didn't know what to do in Brazil. And he found a Yid in the middle of nowhere. And he came and he said, the Rebbe sent me to you, a gas station attendant or something. And the guy turned white, and he said, that he was planning on going away from Yiddishkeit. And he asked the Abish to send me a sign. And he showed up, and he said, the Rebbe sent me to you. So that's a beautiful story. But the background of that story that I heard from someone, think about this chassid. How many other people did the Rebbe ask, are you going to Brazil that day? It's possible that the Rebbe asked many, many people, are you going to Brazil? And they all said no. This chassid, the Rebbe said, you're going to Brazil? He said, yes. The Rebbe said, you're going to Brazil? He went. And he didn't ask any questions. He changed his flight and he went to Brazil. And he saved a Jewish life. The Rebbe was looking for the chassid who would say yes. This is speculation. We don't know that the Rebbe asked other people, but think about it. The Rebbe, he could very easily have said no. But the Rebbe said, are you going to Brazil? He wasn't going to Brazil. He said yes, and he went. And he saved a Jewish life. Because the Rebbe gave him a shlichus, and he accepted the shlichus. But what I want to say, so I say we don't have the tools to understand what the Rebbe is, but one of the big challenges, I grew up in a time when the entire world was against Lubavitch. And when I say the entire world was against Lubavitch, I am not exaggerating. No, before me Yehudi.
You're talking about the
The
religious
from
world.
and the non-from, the religious. Well, the non-religious were against Lubavitch because we throw stones at Jews in Jerusalem, which is not true. And other non-from Jews were against us because we grab their kids and send them to yeshivas and make them religious. And other people were against Chabad because they didn't know who we are. But the religious world was the entire religious world was, I heard once, that the previous Rebbe's time, one of the top leaders of the Jewish community, one of the top Rabbanim in New York, had an article published in a Yiddish newspaper in Yiddish saying how outreach is against Torah and how bad it is. And the Chassidim of the Frierdiker Rebbe were very upset by this. They showed the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, "Don't worry, there'll come a day when they'll do it and they'll say they started it." Yeah, I heard that 25 years or 30 years ago. I heard this. Baruch Hashem, we're here today. But anyway, I remember that when we moved, my father was like, my parents were shluchim in a place called Sunderland, and we moved to London. And when we moved to London, my mother told me the people who live and behind our fence, it's wonderful, the Chassidim, because where we live, they're all goyim, our neighbors. And here it's beautiful, the Chassidish family. So a Chassidish family with payas. So my brother and I, we climb up, we see these people, we say hello. These little kids, we were 9, 10, these kids were also, "Oh, you're goyim." Goyim. Why are we goyim? Because we're Lubavitchers. Why are Lubavitchers goyim? Because we associate with goyim. Which goyim do we associate? Other Jews who are not religious, they call them goyim, so we're also goyim. This is how it was. The whole world was against us. One of the big things.
That explains a lot of our problems. Neurosis.
Neurosis. One of the big things that people say, why do you talk so much about the Rebbe? Brachas from the Rebbe, connecting to the Rebbe, going to the Rebbe, Yechidus by the Rebbe, Rebbe, why don't you talk about God? So first of all, it's not true. We talk about God all the time. We daven to Hashem. We learn Torah that is Hashem's Torah. We talk about Hashem all the time. And we talk about the Rebbe because the Rebbe is telling us what Hashem wants of us. And the Rebbe connects us to Hashem. Chas v'shalom to say we don't talk about God. But what is this obsession with the Rebbe? So it says in the Gemara says, Oladav kaboy, attach yourself to Hashem is one of the mitzvahs, one of the 613 mitzvahs, attach yourself to Hashem. How is it possible for a Jew to attach himself to Hashem? The Gemara asks that question. Hashem is a flaming fire, how can we attach ourselves to Hashem? So it says, attach yourself to the leaders of the Jewish people, and it's as if you attach yourself to Hashem. What does that mean? What does that mean? I said before that the Rebbe, a tzaddik, a true tzaddik, when he's in this world, his neshama is still like it's in Atzilus. It's a body. The body is only a vehicle to hold the soul. We are identified as a body with a neshama. Who am I? I'm my body. What do I see? I see the world. I think about it. I learn about it. I have a neshama. A tzaddik is a neshama. That's who he is. That's his whole thing, is being as a neshama. But he's trapped, held in his body, in his guf, that is what holds the body, what holds the neshama into the world. So when you attach yourself to the tzaddik, you're attaching yourself to Atzilus, to neshama of Atzilus. And the tzaddik, well, as I said before, when the Rebbe looked into someone's eyes, it awakens their yechida and transformed people completely. There are now videos, thousands and thousands of videos of people who came to the Rebbe. You can't imagine. People are so far from Yiddishkeit. The top people in the government in Eretz Yisrael and from all over the world, they talk about the encounter with the Rebbe. They saw the Rebbe and it transformed them. How does that happen? Because when the Rebbe would connect us to Hashem, the Rebbe, a tzaddik, every tzaddik is like that. The tzaddik of the generation is one who connects us to Hashem. And it says in Tanya that all the brachas and all the light and all the holiness and all the physical brachas that come to the world come through the tzaddik of the generation. This is in the Gemara. It's not something that we made up. This is it. So when we talk about a Rebbe, 25 years after the Yartzeit, is this 70 years of leadership? And maybe with this we'll conclude. 70 years of leadership, absolutely 70 years of leadership. Because the Rebbe is a neshama. And not only, as it says in Tanya, and the Rebbe spoke about this many, many times about the Frierdiker Rebbe, not only is the neshama here like it was before, but the neshama is here more than it was before. Because before, to see the Rebbe, you had to go to speak to the Rebbe physically. You have to see the Rebbe physically. Today the Rebbe is not limited to the body. The Rebbe is everywhere. So yes, to go to the oil is the resting place of the Rebbe. That's where the physical the Rebbe is, and that's where the kedusha of the Rebbe is. And we know many stories of people who went to the Rebbe and the oil and got brachas. But today, if you do connect to the Rebbe wherever we are, the Rebbe is with us everywhere. And by the way, even then, before Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe would say, I'm more with the one who's the shliach who's doing shlichus. The Rebbe is more with anyone who does his work more than he is in 770. Because the Rebbe is not limited. And when we connect to the Rebbe, our generation is the Dor HaShvi. Actually, it was foretold. The Rebbe told us many times, the darkest time of the night is the time just before the dawn. By the way, this physically, it's not necessarily the case. In our perception, it's that way. Scientists will tell you that it starts getting lighter after midnight or something like that. But it doesn't matter, because from our perception, it's the darkness. We see the darkness. We don't see the light. When the Rebbe told us this, he prepared us for this time. When has there ever been a time when we don't have a physical leader telling us every day what the Eibishter wants from us today? This is the darkest time in history. There's never been such a time. We don't have a Rebbe today physically telling us. But the Rebbe told us, this is why it's so dark, because now is the time of Mashiach. And we connect to Hashem, we connect to Mashiach, we connect to the light of Mashiach, we connect to the holiness of the world when we connect to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is here with us. We should never think that it's not the case. I want to tell you a quick story that I heard yesterday from a chavrusa of mine. You know, many people, they go to the Rebbe, they go to the oil, and they say they get answers by the oil. The Rebbe finds ways to answer questions. There is a Jew who is a big sponsor of the food on Simchas Torah in 770 outside. I was never, when I was there, it never happened. Right. Since we were there, it never happened. But now in 770, the whole Tishrei, and especially on Simchas Torah, there's tons and tons of food for everybody to eat, so you don't have to go anywhere. We never ate in Simchas Torah, because by the time our kafos was over, there was nothing left to eat. There was no place. But now there's food and everything. So one of the major sponsors of the food, so this younger man, a shliach from this area, went to the oil, and when I went outside of the oil, he saw this guy who sponsors the food with another couple of people there, and he went over to him and he said to him, he saw him coming out of the oil, he said, I want to thank you. I've never had an opportunity to meet you and thank you personally. Many times I ate the food when I was here in 770, I ate the food that you gave. And this man turned to his friend and he said, you see, the Rebbe gave us the answer. We're going to do it again this year. Apparently he'd gone into the Rebbe and he had said he was having some challenges, difficulties, and maybe he shouldn't do it this year. And this younger man gave him the answer. This I heard yesterday. So anyway, the Rebbe is with us. All we have to do is connect. So what does it mean? This monumental occasion of 70 years. 70 years is a lifetime. 70 years is a tkufa. It's a whole new. So perhaps we have to move into the next stage. We need to move on. We need to overcome all the obstacles, not look at the obstacles. And I'm going to conclude with a story that happened with me. This is a story one of those stories that's like a transformative story. This is the meaning of L'chatchila Ribber. You know L'chatchila Ribber, the Rebbe Marash said, and the Rebbe pushed it again and again. The Rebbe said L'chatchila Ribber and Ribber. L'chatchila Ribber means, the whole world says, if you come to an obstacle, if you can't get over it, you go over it. If you can't get under it, you go over it. I say, the Rebbe Marash said, go over it in the first place. So what does that mean? What does it mean, go over it in the first place? There was a doctor in San Jose, he's actually 100 years old, he's still alive, Kanai Nara, who was the president of the Reform Temple in San Jose then. And he called me about something. He saw a sign that we'd put up, and he called me, and we got close, and I started giving a Gemara class in his office every Wednesday. And we had a bunch of doctors. He invited, and we would learn Gemara in his office.
Which Gemara?
We learned Chelak, actually, for a while. And then we learned I think we started about Metzir, and then we learned, he wanted to learn Agadah, so we learned Chelak. So he had a son who I met, who was a brilliant medical student. He was the valedictorian of his class. Wow. he was a little crazy. He gave the valedictorian speech with a cap and a gown and barefoot, just because he wanted to show that he could do things differently. Anyway, so one day his father says to me, so I met him a couple of times. I invited him to come to me for Shabbos. This and that. No. So one day his father said he would like to come and attend the Talmud class. He's doing a research study and he wants to come attend this. I said, sure. So he comes to Talmud class, and the whole Talmud class, I could see he's not listening, he's watching me. The whole class is looking at me, not looking in the book. At the end of this, he says to me, I'm doing a study on focus. He said, you are one of the most focused people I've ever seen. This is incredible focus. I bet you could break a board with your bare hands. I said, what are you talking? Right now I work out. And by the way, I recommend to everybody, I work out and I do exercise. But in those days, I was not exactly in shape. And I said to him, you're kidding. I could never do that. He said, yes, you can. You can. I said, okay. He said, I'll show you. I said, okay, you come to my house for Shabbos, Friday afternoon. Come some time before Shabbos, and we'll do it then. He said, okay. So he comes to my house a half an hour before Shabbos with a board. So I was expecting him to bring a board. He brought a 2x6. 2x6. So it's this wide, this thick, right? And this high. And he says, you're going to break this board. And I said, you're nuts. You're going to break the board. So he says, first I'm going to show you the move. The move, okay? So you're going to hit it with the palm of your hand. You go like this. All right? Practice. Breathe out. So I go. Okay. He says, okay, that's only part of it. The next part is the focus. Very important. He says, you focus on a point a few inches past the board. I'm going to hold the board like this. You focus, don't focus on the board. Focus on a few inches past the board. Okay? Okay, so I know it's not going to work. So I take a deep breath and I go, and sure enough, bang, my hand hits the board is still there, my hand is feeling the pain, nothing happened. I say, you see? He says, no, you didn't do what I tell you. You hit the board, right? I said, yeah, I hit the board. He says, you're not supposed to hit the board. The board is not there. You have to hit a point a couple of inches past the board. So I did it again. This time, I listened to him, and I really focused past the board, and I went like that. And I want to tell you, sometimes you have like an out-of-body experience. I went like that, and somewhere in the room, I wasn't there in the room, and I heard this crack like a shot from a gun. And then a second later, I come back into the room, and I see my kids are all clapping, and the board is in two pieces.
Wow! Rabbi Levin! No, security! I got it for security, my God! Is that real?
It's a Maisa, it's a true story. My little kids remember it. It's a true story. My wife remembers it, my kids don't remember it. My wife remembers it. I learned that's the meaning of the Chatchila Aribar. It's not that you find an obstacle and you jump over it. The obstacle doesn't exist. The Rebbe told us again and again and again, the obstacle is only a figment of your imagination. It's there as a test. The darkness is there so that you should light it. What is darkness? Darkness is nothing. Darkness is absence of light. Light a candle. There was a shliach who wrote to the Rebbe that his shul is dead. There's no simcha in his shul. The Rebbe said, that's your job. Bring the simcha to the shul. That's what you're supposed to do. Right? It's dark in the world. You know why it's dark? It's dark because you're supposed to bring the candle. It's an obstacle so that you should go over it. L'chatchila Rebbe, don't focus on... You set your eye on the goal. You know what the goal is? The goal is to bring Mashiach. How am I going to bring Mashiach? Who am I? No such thing as who am I. Remember, don't be humble. I can bring Mashiach. I want you to imagine this. Imagine Mashiach comes now. And Mashiach says, what tipped the scales was this Farbrengen that Yidden was sitting together and talking about Shevat and the Rebbe and mitzvahs and Torah. This is what tipped the scales. How are we going to feel? How are we going to feel? For the rest of eternity, our Farbrengen was the last straw that brought Mashiach. That could be the mitzvah that you do, or the mitzvah that you get a fellow to do. You can multiply your mitzvahs by getting other people to do it. Just imagine, this is what I encourage people, I try once in a while when I remember to think of it myself. Here I am faced with a challenge. It's mincha time. I'm in a meeting. It's late. The sun's about to set. Maybe I'll wait a little bit for mincha. No. The Eibishter gave me this opportunity to do daven mincha. Maybe this mincha will bring Mashiach. To learn a mimer, to learn a sikha, to learn Torah, to have another holy book, to buy another couple of holy books, to put a penny in not penny anymore, a nickel in the pushka. A penny's not even a pruta yet. I put a pushka in to remember every day, to put a little money in the pushka, to daven all the mitzvahs that we have. I find a Jew and I see a Jew and I stop him and I say, or to help another Jew who needs help. You never know. This could be the mitzvah that bring Mashiach. So l'chaim, maybe this should help. That from this Farbrengen, we should go forward and do what the Rebbe said many times. When you make the commitment, already you get the schar for it. It's as if it's done. I want everybody, myself included, let us commit to do what the Rebbe wants us to do. First of all, to be proud of who we are. To believe in our power. Not my power, the power that Eibishter gave me. To believe in our power, not to be too humble, to be humble but not too humble. Humble, yes, but humble brings tremendous strength because the Eibishter gives me all the power if I'm humble. To reach out, to make a achlata, to reach out to other Jews, to do another mitzvah, to learn more Torah, to improve ourselves, our families. Avos Yisrael, if we know of a Jew that we don't get along with, to make that up, to fix it, like the Rambam says, these grudges are meaningless, they're ridiculous, you shouldn't hold grudges. Make up with another Jew, reach out to another Jew, and let us all finish the job and bring Mashiach now. L'chaim, l'chaim.